Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been hesitating to share this for so long. It's been almost 50 years now, but what happened during that summer of 1974 still gives me chills. I guess I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Back then, I lived in this old farmhouse about 2 miles north of Baltimore, Ohio, just off Route 158. It was pretty isolated, the kind of place where you could yell at the top of your lungs and nobody would hear you. Our nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away. I loved that place despite its quirks, the creaky floorboards, the drafty windows, the way the wind would whistle through the attic on stormy nights. It was home. I had 2 German shepherds, Rex and Duke. They were good guard dogs, always alert, but never aggressive without reason. They'd bark at the occasional delivery person or wild animal, but nothing excessive. That's why what happened that summer was so disturbing. It completely changed their behavior. It started on a Wednesday evening in early July. My sister Janet and her husband Mike were visiting, and we were watching some TV show I can't even remember now. The windows were open because it was one of those hot, sticky summer nights, and the air conditioning in that old place was practically non-existent. Around 9:30, I first noticed the thumping. It was faint at first. So much so that I thought it might be my imagination. I remember looking at Janet and Mike, but they seemed engrossed in the TV, so I didn't say anything. Then I heard it again, slightly louder. A distinct thump against the back wall of the house. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. They both shook their heads, but Mike reached for the remote to lower the volume. That's when we heard the dogs. Rex and Duke were going absolutely ballistic outside, barking in a way I'd never heard before. It wasn't their usual "someone's coming up the driveway" bark. This was different, higher pitched, almost panicky. "Something's got them spooked," Mike said, getting up from his seat. Before any of us could move toward the door, there was a tremendous bang against the back of the house. It was so forceful that a picture fell off the wall. Janet let out a small scream, and even Mike jumped. "What the hell was that?" Janet whispered, clutching Mike's arm. My heart was racing, but I tried to stay calm. "Probably just a branch or something," I said, not believing it myself. No branch could hit that hard. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the cattle prod I kept for emergencies with the livestock. Mike followed me to the back door, while Janet stayed in the living room, peering anxiously through the curtains. The night was weirdly quiet when we stepped outside. Even the insects seemed to have gone silent. The only sound was Rex and Duke's continued barking from their kennel about 30 yards from the house. I flipped on the porch light, but it barely cut through the darkness beyond the immediate area. "Rex! Duke! Quiet down!" I called out, but they ignored me completely, something they never did. I walked toward their kennel, cattle prod gripped tightly in my hand. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I had this overwhelming feeling we were being watched. As I got closer to the dogs, I saw Rex cowering in the corner of the kennel, his hair raised and his tail tucked between his legs. Duke was still barking furiously, facing the cornfield behind our property. That's when I heard it, a rushing sound, like something large moving quickly through the corn. The stalks were about 6 feet tall at that point in the season, and they swayed and parted about 50 yards away, as if something was pushing through them. "Do you see that?" I whispered to Mike, who had come up beside me. "Yeah," he said, his voice tight. "What is it?" "A deer." But we both knew it wasn't a deer. The movement was too deliberate, too powerful. Whatever was moving through that field was big, much bigger than a deer. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the kennel gate. "Go get it, boys," I commanded, and the dogs shot out like bullets, charging toward the cornfield. I heard them crash through the first row of corn, their barking growing fainter as they pursued whatever was out there. Mike and I stood there, straining to hear. After a minute or two, the dog's barking changed tone, becoming more distant and then suddenly stopping altogether. A chill ran down my spine. "John! Mike!" Janet called from the back porch. "What's going on out there?" Before we could answer, we heard a commotion from the direction of our neighbor's property, the distinctive sound of horses whinnying and stomping in distress. Then, faintly, I could hear Rex and Duke barking again, but they sounded far away now, like they were over by the neighbor's pasture. "We should go back inside," Mike suggested, and I agreed. The dogs would come back when they were ready. We went back in and tried to laugh it off, but none of us could focus on the TV anymore. About 20 minutes later, I heard scratching at the back door. Rex and Duke had returned, both panting heavily with wild looks in their eyes. I checked them over, but neither appeared hurt, just extremely agitated. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every whisper of wind had me sitting bolt upright in bed. The dogs stayed inside with me, which was unusual. They normally preferred their kennel. They spent the whole night pacing and whining. The next day, I walked the property in broad daylight, looking for signs of whatever had disturbed us. Near the back of the house, I found a dent in the siding where something had struck it. Not a branch. There weren't any trees close enough to hit the house. The corn at the edge of my field was trampled in a clear path leading toward my neighbor's property. I drove over to Tom's place. He owned the land adjacent to mine where the horses were kept. He was already out in his pasture when I arrived. "Your dogs chase something onto my property last night?" he asked, not accusingly, just curious. "Yeah, sorry about that," I replied. "Something was banging on my house and spooked them pretty bad. Did you hear anything unusual?" Tom nodded slowly. "My horses were going crazy around 10 o'clock. Never seen them so worked up. Found them huddled together in the far corner of the pasture this morning, still nervous as hell." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Found some weird tracks too, but they don't make any sense." He led me to the far side of his pasture, near where it bordered the woods. There, pressed into the soft mud by a small creek, were several footprints. They were large, at least 15 inches long, and shaped roughly like a human foot, but much wider and with what looked like 5 distinct toes. "What do you make of that?" Tom asked, staring down at the prints. I had no answer. They weren't bear tracks. I'd seen those before. These were something else entirely. That night it happened again, and the next night, and the night after that. Always the same pattern. Thumping on the house, the dogs going crazy, something large moving through the corn or the woods behind the property. Sometimes I'd shine a flashlight out there and catch a glimpse of something tall, ducking behind a tree or disappearing into the darkness. I never got a clear look. After about a week of this, things escalated. I had 2 55-gallon drums of fuel oil stored in my barn that I used for heating during the winter. One morning, I found them missing. Later that day, I discovered one empty drum, about a quarter mile into the woods, dented like something had been playing with it. The other was in the creek, partially submerged. The oil was gone, spilled who knows where. I called the sheriff, thinking maybe it was vandals or teenagers playing pranks. Deputy Wilson came out, took a report, looked at the tracks by Tom's Creek, which by then had mostly washed away, and basically told me there wasn't much he could do. He suggested setting up some game cameras, which I did the next day. But here's the weird thing. None of the cameras ever captured anything. It was like whatever was tormenting us knew exactly where they were and avoided them. Or maybe it damaged them somehow, because twice I found cameras that had been working fine the day before completely dead, with no footage stored. The most terrifying incident happened about 3 weeks into this nightmare. My brother Dave had come to stay with me for a few days, partly to visit, partly because I'd told him about what was happening and he wanted to see for himself. We were up late one night, sitting in the kitchen, drinking beers and catching up. The house had been quiet that evening, no thumping or disturbances. Dave got up to get another beer from the fridge, and as he stood by the kitchen window, he suddenly froze, beer in hand, staring out into the darkness. "John," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something looking in the window." I turned slowly in my chair. The kitchen window was about 6 feet off the ground, too high for a normal person to look in without standing on something. Dave's face had gone completely white. "It's staring right at me," he said. "Don't make any sudden movements." I eased out of my chair and moved slowly toward him. As I approached, I saw it, just for a split second before it ducked away. A large, dark shape with eyes that reflected the kitchen light. The face wasn't human, but it wasn't fully animal either. It had a massive brow ridge and what looked like dark hair covering it. The eyes were what haunted me most, intelligent, curious, almost evaluating us. The moment it realized I'd seen it too, it dropped from view. We heard heavy footsteps running away from the house, and then the dogs started their frenzied barking again. Dave and I looked at each other, both shaking. "Tell me you saw that," he said. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "That wasn't human," I finally managed to say. After that night, I couldn't take it anymore. The constant disrupted sleep, the feeling of being watched, the inexplicable events. It was all too much. Within a week, I had made arrangements to sell the farm and move closer to town. I hated giving up my home, but I couldn't live like that anymore. I've never talked much about what happened that summer. Most people would think I was crazy. But over the years, I've kept in touch with friends in Morgan County, and occasionally I hear stories. Livestock being disturbed, strange noises in the night, large footprints found in remote areas. Tom sold his place a few years after I left, told me he couldn't handle the horses being spooked all the time. I don't know what was out there in the summer of '74. I've read about Bigfoot sightings since then, seen the documentaries and TV shows. Some of the descriptions match what Dave and I saw that night. All I know for certain is that something intelligent and not human was watching my house, terrorizing my dogs, and for whatever reason, had focused its attention on me and my property. To this day, I can't hear unexpected thumping sounds without my heart racing, and I never ever leave my curtains open after dark. Story 2. I've been sitting on this for over 20 years now, and I still get cold sweats thinking about it. This happened back in 2002, when I was 26. Me, my brother Jake, and our 2 buddies from college, Marcus and Dave, had been planning this epic backpacking trip into the Canadian wilderness for months. We were all experienced hikers, not experts or anything, but we'd done plenty of weekend trips around Washington state. This was supposed to be our big adventure though, a solid week in the backcountry near Banff, Alberta. We'd picked Dormer Pass, which was supposed to be challenging but doable for guys with our experience level. We met up in Seattle, loaded everything into Marcus's Subaru, and made the drive up to Canada, talking shit and getting hyped the whole way. The first day went exactly according to plan. Weather was perfect, mid-60s, partly cloudy, light breeze. We covered about 11 miles and made camp at this little spot near a stream. Everything felt right, you know? We cooked some freeze-dried meals, had a couple beers we'd packed in, worth the extra weight, and crashed early because we wanted to get an early start the next day. That second day is when everything went to hell. We'd been hiking for about 4 hours when we came to this fork in the trail that wasn't marked on any of our maps. One path looked well-traveled and continued roughly in the direction we were heading. The other veered off a bit, but seemed to follow the contour of the ridge we'd been planning to circle around anyway. Dave was the one who suggested we take the second path. He thought it might be a shortcut, or at least offer better views. None of us had any real objection. The path looked solid enough at first, so we took it. About 2 miles in, we realized we'd made a mistake. The trail got narrower and narrower until it basically disappeared. I remember Jake saying, "This isn't a hiking trail, it's a damn game trail." He was right. We'd basically been following paths made by deer or elk, or whatever else roams those woods. We stopped to figure out what to do. Marcus checked his GPS, but reception was spotty as hell out there. We knew roughly where we were, but not exactly. After some back and forth, we decided to split up. Looking back, that was so stupid, but it made sense at the time. Jake and Marcus would backtrack to the fork and take the main trail, while Dave and I would cut east through the woods towards something called Cascade Fire Road, which we knew would eventually lead us back to civilization. We figured we'd meet up at our next planned campsite, or, worst case, back at the trailhead in a couple days. We separated around 3 in the afternoon. Dave and I had plenty of daylight left, or so we thought. The forest was thick as hell. We had to climb over fallen trees and push through these dense patches of underbrush. It slowed us down a lot. I kept checking my compass to make sure we were still heading east, but it was tough to maintain a straight line with all the obstacles. By 7, the sun was starting to set, and we still hadn't reached the fire road. Dave was getting antsy. I remember him checking his watch every 5 minutes and adjusting his pack straps over and over. Nervous habits. I was trying to stay calm, but I was worried too. Neither of us wanted to spend the night lost in unfamiliar woods. Just as the light was really fading, we emerged into this huge meadow. It was maybe the size of a football field, completely open, with tall grass that came up to our knees. The sunset had turned everything this weird golden orange color. In any other circumstance, it would have been beautiful. We were about halfway across the meadow when we heard it. This strange whistling sound coming from our left. Not like a person whistling, but not like any bird I'd ever heard either. It was low, then high, then low again, with this weird rhythm to it. Dave froze mid-step and looked at me. I must have had the same "what the fuck" expression he did. The sound was coming from a stream that ran along the edge of the meadow, partially hidden by some bushes. We could hear splashing, like something was moving through the water. Something big. "What is that?" Dave whispered. I shook my head. I had no clue. Then it emerged from the bushes, and I swear to God my heart just stopped. It was dark, almost black, and walking on 2 legs like a person. But it wasn't a person. No way. This thing was huge. Had to be 7 feet tall at least. Its proportions were all wrong. It didn't seem to have a neck. Its head just kind of merged into its shoulders, which sat strangely. Low. Its arms were too long for its body, and it was broad, not fat but wide and solid. I noticed this weird, lighter-colored patch on one shoulder, like a scar or birthmark or something. That detail has stuck with me all these years for some reason. The thing was walking from left to right across our field of vision, maybe 100 yards away. It moved with this weird, deliberate gait, not stumbling or awkward, but not quite natural either. I was completely frozen, just staring at it. Then Dave grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in so hard they left bruises. "Ethan," he hissed, "look right." I tore my eyes away from the first creature and nearly pissed myself. There was a second one. It had emerged from behind a tree to our right, maybe 50 yards away. This one was even bigger, closer to 8 feet tall, and lighter in color, a sort of whitish gray. It was more muscular than the first one, with this imposing build that made me feel like a child by comparison. The weirdest part? Neither of them seemed to notice us or care that we were there. They just walked purposefully across the meadow and disappeared into the trees on the far side, one after the other. For maybe 30 seconds after they vanished, Dave and I just stood there, not moving, barely breathing. Then something in me just snapped, and I started running, east, toward where the fire road should be. Dave was right behind me. We ran until our lungs were burning, stumbling through the darkening forest, tripping over roots and rocks. We didn't talk. We didn't stop. We just ran. We reached Cascade Fire Road around 11 that night, completely exhausted. It was just a dirt road cutting through the forest, but it felt like finding civilization after being lost at sea. We followed it south for about an hour before we finally collapsed, setting up our tent with shaking hands. Neither of us slept. We just sat there in the dark, jumping at every sound from the forest. At first light, we packed up and kept moving. We hitched a ride with a Parks Canada truck that was driving the road around 9 in the morning. The ranger asked us what we were doing out there, why we looked so ragged. We made up some bullshit about getting separated from our friends and taking a wrong turn. We didn't mention what we'd seen. How could we? He'd think we were crazy or on drugs or something. We made it back to the trailhead by that afternoon. Jake and Marcus were already there, worried sick about us. They'd made it to the campsite with no problems and waited for us, then backtracked when we didn't show. They'd been about to report us missing when we rolled up. On the drive back to Seattle, Dave and I tried to explain what we'd seen. Jake and Marcus listened, but I could tell they didn't believe us. Not really. They suggested bears walking on hind legs, or moose in the weird light, or even just exhaustion making us see things. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a moose. It wasn't any animal I recognize. Those things moved like they had purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going and what they were doing. And they moved through that meadow like they owned it, like they belonged there, and we were the intruders. Dave and I have talked about it a few times over the years. He saw the same things I did. We've looked into reports of strange creatures in that region, but nothing quite matches what we encountered. Some Sasquatch reports come close, but even those don't quite fit. I haven't been back to Banff since then. I still hike, still camp, but never alone, and never in remote backcountry. I can't shake the feeling that there are things out there in the wilderness that we don't understand, things that prefer to be left alone. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if those creatures had noticed us that day. Would they have approached us, attacked us, or just continued on their way? I'll never know, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. I still have nightmares about that meadow. In my dreams, those creatures always turn and look at me with faces I can never quite see clearly. And in my dreams, unlike reality, they always start walking toward us. I wake up from those nightmares drenched in sweat, with the sound of that unnatural whistling still echoing in my ears. Whatever we saw that day in Banff, it wasn't human, it wasn't natural. And the rational part of my brain, the part that wants to make sense of everything, still struggles with it. But I know what I saw, and I know that sometimes the woods are home to things we're not meant to understand. If you're ever hiking in Banff, stick to the marked trails. Don't take shortcuts. And if you hear whistling coming from the bushes as the sun sets, run. Don't look back, just run. Story 3. I still can't believe what happened to me last October. I've been hunting my whole life, spent countless nights in the backcountry, and never experienced anything like it. I've tried to convince myself it was just a weird animal or maybe the wind playing tricks, but deep down, I know better. Whatever was out there that night wasn't something normal. My buddy Jason and I had planned this hunting trip for months. We're both experienced outdoorsmen. I've been hunting the Colorado mountains since I was 12, and Jason's family basically lived off elk meat growing up. We decided to try our luck on the Land's End side of Grand Mesa, an area I'd hunted a few times before with decent success. We arrived early that morning, parked at the Canna Creek trailhead, and spent the day scouting. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, clear skies, temperatures in the mid-50s. We were hoping to spot some deer sign or maybe even get lucky with an elk, but by late afternoon, we hadn't seen much besides some old tracks and droppings. Not unusual for hunting. Some days you just strike out. Around 5 o'clock, we had to make a decision. Head back to the truck and drive the 2 hours home in the dark, or camp out and try again at first light. Since we'd already hauled in our packs with sleeping bags and a small tent, we figured we might as well stay. There was this small lake about a half-mile off the main trail that looked promising. Secluded, good water source, and we'd seen some fresher tracks heading that direction. We found a decent spot to set up camp, maybe 50 yards from the shoreline. Nothing fancy, just a small 2-person tent, a makeshift fire pit, and our gear. The sun was starting to set behind the mesa, casting these long shadows across the water. It was peaceful, normal. Nothing felt off or strange. I was gathering some firewood while Jason was setting up the tent when he suddenly stopped what he was doing. He stood completely still, head tilted slightly. "Mark, you hear that?" he asked, his voice weirdly tight. At first, I didn't hear anything besides the wind in the pines and some birds. Then it came. This sound that's been burned into my brain ever since. It started as a low moan that quickly rose into this horrific scream. The best way I can describe it is like a siren, but organic. It rose and fell in pitch, lasting maybe 15 to 20 seconds. It wasn't just loud, it was powerful, like it was coming from something with massive lungs. And there was this raw quality to it that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. "Mountain lion?" Jason asked, but I could tell he didn't believe that any more than I did. I've heard mountain lions before. They can make blood-curdling screams for sure, but this was different, deeper, more resonant, and it carried across the lake in a way that no cougar call I've ever heard could. Plus, it had this almost deliberate quality to it, like whatever was making it was trying to be heard. We both stood frozen, waiting to see if it would happen again. Less than a minute later, it did. The same rising and falling scream, but maybe even louder this time. It was definitely coming from across the lake, maybe a quarter-mile away. "What the hell is that?" Jason whispered. I could see he was trying to keep it together, but his hands were shaking. "Not sure," I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Bear, maybe? Though I've never heard a bear make a sound like that." The screaming continued, with only short breaks between each call. During one of these pauses, I made a decision that I've second-guessed ever since. I walked over to my rifle, picked it up, and fired a single shot into the air. Warning shots usually scare off wildlife, bears, mountain lions, whatever. It's the universal signal that humans are present and armed. For about 30 seconds after my shot, there was complete silence. The forest went dead quiet, no birds, no wind, nothing. I remember feeling relieved, thinking whatever it was had taken off. Then the screaming started again. This time it was different, louder, more forceful, and there was this new quality to it that I can only describe as aggressive. It wasn't just a call anymore. It felt like a challenge or a threat, and it seemed closer. That's when we heard the brush moving. There were these loud cracking sounds coming from the far side of the lake, the sound of branches breaking and vegetation being pushed aside. Something big was moving around over there. In the fading light, we couldn't see anything specific, but we could track the movement by the noise. Whatever it was circling along the shoreline. I've had close encounters with bears, moose, even a mountain lion once. They all have distinct ways of moving through the forest. Bears lumber and crash through brush. Moose make these heavy, plodding steps. This was neither. It moved with purpose, but also with a kind of erratic energy, like it was agitated. "Mark, this isn't right," Jason said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. That warning shot should have scared it off. He was absolutely right. That's when my confidence really started to waver. Animals retreat from gunshots. It's just instinct. They don't get more aggressive. They don't start circling you. Something about this behavior was deeply abnormal. I checked my rifle, a 30-06, more than enough firepower to handle any animal in these mountains. Jason had his .270 Winchester. We were well armed, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like that was enough. "Let's pack up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't want to be here after dark." We started breaking down our camp as quickly and quietly as possible. The tent came down in record time. We didn't bother with the fire pit rocks we'd arranged. All the while, that screaming continued, now punctuated by those crashing sounds as whatever it was continued to move around the lake. The sun had dipped below the horizon by this point, leaving us in that murky twilight where shadows play tricks on your eyes. I kept thinking I saw movement through the trees, across the water. something tall moving between the pines, but it was too dark to be certain. As we finished packing, the screaming changed again. It became more frequent, almost continuous, with barely a pause between each call. And now, there was this rhythmic quality to it, almost like speech, but not quite human. I've never heard anything like it before or since. We shouldered our packs and started moving, flashlights out, rifles ready. I led the way back toward the trail, constantly scanning the trees around us. Jason kept looking back over his shoulder. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We both just wanted to get the hell out of there. The hike back to the trail felt 10 times longer than it had earlier that day. Every shadow looked threatening, every rustling leaf made us jump. The screaming continued behind us, but thankfully it didn't seem to be following our exact path. It stayed near the lake, at least for the time being. When we finally reached the main trail, we broke into a jog. Our packs were bouncing uncomfortably, but neither of us cared. It was almost fully dark now, our flashlight beams cutting thin paths through the blackness. I remember checking over my shoulder and seeing nothing but darkness among the trees, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, tracking our movement, just waiting for us to make a mistake. We reached the truck in what must have been record time. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As soon as the engine turned over, I threw it into reverse, spun around, and started down the access road as fast as I dared. The road down from Land's End is steep and winding, not something you want to take at high speed, especially in the dark, but I was pushing it, taking curves faster than was safe, just desperate to put distance between us and whatever was back there. It wasn't until we were about 3 miles down the mountain that the screaming finally faded out of earshot. I pulled over at a wide spot in the road, and we just sat there for a minute, catching our breath. The dashboard clock read 8:17. The whole experience had lasted less than 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. "What the fuck was that?" Jason finally asked, breaking the silence. I shook my head. "I don't know, man. I really don't." We barely talked about it on the drive home. I think we were both processing, trying to fit what we'd experienced into some kind of rational framework. Jason suggested maybe it was someone messing with us, but that didn't make sense. We were miles from anywhere, and who would go to that much trouble? I floated the idea that maybe it was some kind of territorial animal behavior we weren't familiar with, but deep down, I knew that wasn't it either. For weeks afterward, I kept replaying that sound in my head. I started researching animal calls online, trying to match it to something, anything, that would make sense. I listened to recordings of every predator in Colorado, but nothing came close. Then one night, I fell down this internet rabbit hole. I ended up on this website with alleged recordings of Bigfoot vocalizations. I'm not saying I believe in that stuff. I've always considered myself pretty grounded. But when I played one of those recordings, my blood ran cold. It matched exactly what we heard that night. The same rise and fall pattern, the same length of calls, the same unnerving combination of power and what sounded almost like rage. I haven't been back to Grand Mesa since then. I've hunted other areas, but something about that place now feels forbidden. Jason and I still hunt together occasionally, but we never really talk about what happened. Maybe we're afraid that putting it into words would force us to confront what we actually experienced. All I know is that whatever was screaming across that lake wasn't something that's supposed to exist in those mountains. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, wasn't a person. To this day, I sleep with my window closed, even in summer, because sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can hear that screaming again, rising and falling like a siren from another world. Story 4. I still can't explain what I saw that night in 1987. I've tried to rationalize it for over 30 years now, but nothing makes sense. I was only 23 at the time, working as a bartender at this dive in Dallas. The pay was decent, but the hours were killing me. Late nights, drunk customers, coming home smelling like beer and cigarettes every night. This regular at my bar, Jim, was always talking about his job at the highway toll booth. "Best gig I ever had," he'd say. 8 hours of sitting on your ass, reading whatever you want, and just collecting money every now and then. It sounded perfect. I was trying to go back to school, and I needed time to study. So when Jim mentioned they were hiring, I jumped at the opportunity, got the job pretty easily. Basic training took just a day. They showed me how to operate the cash register, what to do in emergencies, and basic protocol. Nothing complicated. The booth was tiny, just enough room for a small desk, chair, and a little electric heater for the colder months. There was a small bathroom behind the booth for emergencies, but we were encouraged to use proper facilities during breaks. I was assigned to Booth 7 on Highway 175, heading out of Dallas toward Kaufman County. It was pretty rural once you got past the city limits. My shift was from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, the absolute deadest hours. Perfect for reading or studying. My first couple of shifts were uneventful, boring even. Just what I wanted. A car would come through maybe every 15 or 20 minutes. I'd collect the toll, make change, and go back to whatever book I was reading. The booth had this fluorescent light that hummed constantly and made everything look washed out. Outside was darkness, with just the highway lights casting an orange glow on the empty lanes. It was my 4th night on the job, Thursday, October 12th. I remember because it was 2 days before my mom's birthday, and I was planning to use my first paycheck to buy her something nice. I had brought The Bourne Identity with me, just started it the night before and was already hooked. Around 1:30 in the morning, traffic had slowed to almost nothing, maybe one car every half hour. I was deep into my book when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. At first, I ignored it, probably just a car approaching in the distance, but there was no sound of an engine. I glanced up from the book, looking through the window to my right. Nothing on the road, but there was movement by the concrete barriers. These were massive cement walls, maybe 12 feet high, installed to keep deer and other wildlife from jumping onto the highway. The Texas Department of Transportation had put them up earlier that year after several fatal accidents involving deer. I squinted, trying to get a better look. It was dark beyond the highway lights, but I could see something moving at the base of the barrier. At first, I thought it might be a coyote or maybe a large raccoon. We got all kinds of wildlife out there. Then it stood up. My first thought was that someone had let their dog out, but this was too big for a dog. Then I thought maybe it was a bear, but there hadn't been bears in that part of Texas for a century. My next thought, and this shows how my brain was desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing, was that it must be a chimpanzee that escaped from someone's exotic pet collection, or maybe from a research facility. It was dark and hairy, about 5 feet tall with long arms. But the way it moved, it wasn't like any chimp I'd ever seen. It was more fluid, more deliberate, and the proportions were all wrong. Its legs were longer, its shoulders broader. I remember feeling my heart rate pick up. The booth suddenly felt very small and very exposed. All 4 walls were windows. Anyone or anything could see in, and there was nowhere to hide. The creature moved toward the center of the road, and that's when I noticed something else lying on the asphalt. It looked like roadkill, a large bird, maybe a hawk or a vulture. There were always dead animals on that stretch of highway. The creature approached the carcass cautiously, looking up and down the highway. It was checking for cars. That level of awareness sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't some mindless animal. It was thinking, planning. Headlights appeared in the distance, coming from the direction of Dallas. The creature noticed too, but instead of running away, it quickly grabbed the dead bird in its jaws, not hands, jaws, and then did something I still can't believe. It ran straight up the concrete barrier, not climbed, ran vertically. Like gravity was just a suggestion. It moved so fast, just a dark blur against the gray concrete. When it reached the top, It paused for just a moment, silhouetted against the night sky, then dropped down on the other side. The approaching car, a blue sedan, drove past my booth. The driver, an older man, paid his toll without even looking at me. I wanted to ask if he'd seen it too, but my voice wouldn't work. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely make change. After he drove off, I stood up on wobbly legs and went to the door of my booth. I should have stayed inside. That would have been the smart thing to do. But I needed to confirm what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a weird shadow or my eyes playing tricks on me. I stepped outside, keeping close to the booth. The night air was cool and damp. October in Texas can be unpredictable, and a light fog was rolling in from the fields beyond the highway. I could hear crickets and the occasional car in the distance, but nothing else. Walking to where I'd seen the creature, I found nothing on the road. No footprints, no sign that anything had been there. But the roadkill was gone. There had definitely been something dead on the road, and now it wasn't there. I looked up at the concrete barrier. It had to be at least 12 feet high with a smooth surface. No handholds, nothing to grip. It would be impossible for a human to climb, let alone run up. Another car approached and I hurried back to my booth. This time it was a woman with 2 sleeping kids in the back. She handed me exact change, looking exhausted. Again, I wanted to ask if she'd seen anything unusual, but what would I say? "Excuse me, ma'am, did you happen to notice a monster on the highway?" For the rest of my shift, I couldn't focus on my book. I kept looking up at every sound, every shadow. The booth felt like a glass cage, exposing me from all sides. I kept the heater running, not because it was particularly cold, but because the humming noise was comforting. It reminded me that I was still in the real world. When my relief arrived at 6 in the morning, I almost hugged him. I didn't mention what I'd seen. What would be the point? He'd think I was crazy, or that I'd fallen asleep on the job and had a nightmare. Driving home in the early morning light, everything looked normal. Farms, fields, the occasional gas station. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me. I called in sick the next day, and the day after that. By Monday, I'd convinced myself that I must have dozed off while reading. It was a boring job after all, and I wasn't used to the night shift. That had to be it. But when I went back to work, I requested a different booth. Told my supervisor I was having back problems and needed a booth with a better chair. He assigned me to booth 3, closer to the administrative building, where there was more traffic and more light. I kept that job for another 6 months before going back to bartending full-time. I never saw anything unusual again, but I also never worked the late shift, and never at booth 7. Over the years, I've tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I really did fall asleep. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion caused by headlights and shadows. But deep down, I know what I saw. I've done research since then, looked into cryptid sightings in Texas. There are stories of the Lake Worth monster from the 60s and 70s, some kind of hairy, goat-faced creature that terrorized couples making out near the lake, and the Big Thicket Wildman in East Texas, but nothing that matches what I saw that night. What bothers me most isn't just that this creature existed, it's how it moved. That vertical run up a sheer concrete wall defied physics. And the intelligence in its movements, the way it checked for cars, the deliberate way it grabbed that roadkill, it knew exactly what it was doing. I've never told this story to anyone who wasn't a few drinks in. It sounds too crazy, too impossible. But I know what I saw, and sometimes when I'm driving on a dark highway at night, I find myself scanning the roadside barriers, half expecting to see that dark figure again, defying gravity and everything I thought I knew about the natural world. The weirdest part? A few years later, I ran into Jim, the guy who told me about the toll booth job. We got to talking about the old days, and I cautiously brought up booth 7, asking if he'd ever experienced anything strange there. He got real quiet, then changed the subject completely. Wouldn't look me in the eye for the rest of the night. I never saw him again after that, heard he moved to Oklahoma or somewhere up north. Sometimes I wonder how many others have seen it. How many drivers glanced to the side of the highway at just the right moment, saw something impossible, and then convinced themselves they were just tired or seeing things. How many toll booth operators have sat in that small glass box, watching the darkness, and glimpsed something that shouldn't exist? I don't have answers, just questions that have followed me for over 30 years. And occasionally, when I'm alone at night, the memory of that dark figure running up an impossible wall, silhouetted against the Texas sky, comes back to me. And I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the darkness, just beyond the reach of the highway lights. Story 5. I'm still not sure why I'm writing this down. Maybe to help me process what happened, or maybe because I need someone else to know. My wife, Lisa, thinks I should share our experience. She says keeping it bottled up is making me obsessed. So here goes. This happened 2 weeks before Labor Day in 2017. We were heading home from our little piece of land in the Ouachita National Forest near Mena, Arkansas. It's nothing fancy, just 5 acres we bought years ago where we camp, hunt, and get away from everything. We'd spent the day clearing some brush and setting up a new trail camera, hoping to catch sight of the deer that had been grazing there. It was around 6 in the evening when we packed up. Lisa was driving our F-150 while I rested in the passenger seat. I was tired from swinging a machete all day, but content. The windows were down, and that late summer air felt good. Warm, but not oppressive like it had been in July. US 270 is a road we've driven hundreds of times. It winds through dense forest, and at that time of day, the sun was starting to sink, creating those long shadows through the trees. We were chatting about what to have for dinner when I noticed something in the distance. About 250 yards ahead, I could make out what looked like a person standing in the ditch on the right side of the road. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone's car had broken down, though I didn't see any vehicle. As we got closer, I realized something was off. The proportions weren't right. "Lisa, slow down a bit," I said, leaning forward in my seat. "What is it?" she asked, easing off the gas. "There's someone..." But before I could finish my sentence, the figure turned. What happened next took maybe 10 seconds, but I swear to God, those seconds changed my understanding of the world. The figure stepped out from the ditch and crossed the road in front of us, maybe 20 steps ahead of our truck. Lisa hit the brakes, and we slowed to almost a stop. It wasn't a person, not even close. This thing was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this creature towered over what I'd consider a tall human. It had to be at least 6.5, maybe 7 feet tall. It was covered in dark brown fur, not like a bear's thick coat, but longer, shaggier, almost like human hair, but coarser. It moved with purpose, long, steady strides that covered ground quickly without seeming rushed. The stride was what got me first. It wasn't lumbering like a bear. It wasn't bounding like a deer. It walked upright, with a gait that was eerily human, but with a confidence and fluidity I've never seen in a person. As it passed directly in front of our headlights, I got a clear look at its face, and that's when my stomach dropped. It had a wide, flat face with a broad nose, almost like a gorilla, but different. There was little hair on its forehead and cheeks, revealing dark, leathery skin underneath. Its eyes were deep set, but I couldn't make out their color, just that they were dark and forward-facing. Its arms were disturbingly long, hanging down to its knees and swinging slightly as it walked. The hands were hard to see clearly, but they looked massive. What really struck me were its feet, huge, with long hair hanging off them like a Clydesdale horse. They didn't make a sound as it walked across the asphalt. Another detail I can't shake, it had what looked like red spots or welts on its chest, like it had been bitten by insects or scratched by brush. That small detail haunts me because it made the thing seem somehow more real, more vulnerable. The whole encounter was surreal, but here's what really gets me. It never acknowledged us, never turned its head, never sped up. It just crossed the road like we weren't even there, leapt over the ditch on the other side in one fluid motion, and disappeared into the trees without making a sound. No crashing through underbrush, no breaking branches, just gone. Lisa and I sat there in silence for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Did we just see a werewolf?" she finally asked with a nervous half-laugh. I couldn't answer. My mouth was dry. "See, I've spent my whole life outdoors. I hunt, I fish, I camp. I know every animal native to Arkansas. I've encountered black bears, cougars, coyotes, you name it. This wasn't any of those, not even close. I've always been the practical one. I've rolled my eyes at Bigfoot shows and cryptid hunters my whole life. I was the guy who'd say, if these things existed, someone would have concrete proof by now. Well, now I'm the someone, and I don't have a shred of proof except what I saw with my own eyes." Lisa started driving again, going maybe 25 miles per hour, both of us scanning the tree line. We didn't say much for the rest of the drive home, about 30 minutes. What was there to say? We'd seen something impossible. That night, we tried to process it. Lisa looked up Bigfoot sightings in Arkansas on her phone while I sat at the kitchen table, replaying the encounter in my mind over and over. "There are other reports from this area," she said, "dating back decades." I nodded, but couldn't really focus on what she was saying. I kept seeing that face, those proportions that were so wrong yet so deliberate, the way it moved with purpose. I barely slept that night. Every noise outside had me on edge. I kept thinking about how close our house was to the forest, how thin the walls would be if something that size wanted to get in. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed to go back. Lisa thought I was crazy, but she understood. She offered to come with me, but one of us needed to keep our job, so she went to work while I drove back to the spot. In the daylight, the road looked so ordinary. No footprints on the asphalt, of course. I parked on the shoulder and searched the ditches on both sides, looking for tracks, hair, anything. I found what might have been a large footprint in some soft dirt, but it was vague, could have been anything. I took a picture with my phone, but looking at it later, it was unconvincing even to me. I spent hours combing the forest on both sides of the road, venturing maybe 100 yards in. Nothing, no broken branches, no hair caught on thorns, no obvious path a large creature would make. The forest just swallowed it up. That was 5 years ago, and I think about it every single day. I've gone back to that spot dozens of times. I've set up trail cameras on our property and in that area when I can do it without trespassing. Never caught anything unusual. I've read every book, joined online forums, even attended a Bigfoot convention in Oklahoma last year. Lisa thinks I'm obsessed, and maybe I am. But how do you see something that changes your entire worldview and just go back to normal? The worst part is knowing that it's out there, probably watching us more than we realize. That's what keeps me up at night sometimes. Not fear of being attacked, but the realization that we're not at the top of the food chain in the way we think we are. There's something else out there, something intelligent enough to stay hidden for centuries, living alongside us. I'm not asking you to believe me. Hell, if someone had told me this story 6 years ago, I'd have thought they were nuts or pulling my leg. All I know is what I saw, and what I saw was real. Sometimes when I'm hunting alone now, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. The woods go quiet, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. I never felt that before that day on US 270. One thing's for certain, I don't laugh at Bigfoot stories anymore. And whenever I hear about someone spotting something strange in the woods, my first thought isn't they're crazy. It's I wonder if they saw what I saw. Lisa and I still go to our property, still camp there sometimes. But we're different now. More alert. More aware that the forests around us might hold secrets we're not meant to understand. I keep a better camera in my truck now, just in case. And sometimes, when we're sitting around the campfire at night, we both find ourselves staring into the darkness between the trees, wondering, So that's my story. I don't have proof, I don't have answers. All I have is what I saw that evening in August 5 years ago, and the absolute certainty that whatever it was, it wasn't supposed to exist, but it does. Closer to civilization than most people would ever imagine. Story 6. I've been a hunter since I was a kid. My dad took me out for my first hunt when I was 12, and I've spent almost every hunting season since then in the woods of northern Maine. But what happened in the fall of 1996 still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I remember that day was absolutely miserable, the kind of weather that makes you question why you even bother getting out of bed. It was early November, and a heavy, wet snow had been falling steadily since about noon. Not the light, fluffy stuff, but the heavy, wet snow that soaks through everything. I was sitting at my usual spot, this little clearing about 4 miles into the woods from the logging road where I'd parked my truck that morning. By late afternoon, I was seriously considering packing it in. I'd been out since before dawn and hadn't seen anything worth shooting. I was cold, wet, and honestly just wanted to get back to my cabin and sit by the wood stove with a hot coffee. The only thing keeping me relatively dry was this massive old hemlock I was sitting under. Its branches were thick enough that they created a sort of natural umbrella. I remember checking my watch. It was around 4:30 and the light was starting to fade. In Maine in November, it gets dark quick, and I knew I had about an hour of decent visibility left before I'd need my flashlight for the hike back. I started packing up some of my gear, figuring I'd call it a day. That's when I saw it. A decent-sized buck stepped out into the clearing about 50 yards in front of me. Nothing massive, probably an 8-pointer, but a good clean shot. After sitting in the cold all day, I wasn't about to be picky. I slowly raised my rifle, a Remington 700 I'd had for years, and got the deer in my crosshairs. I took a breath, let it halfway out, and steadied myself for the shot like I'd done hundreds of times before. But I didn't pull the trigger. I still don't know why. Something just stopped me. It wasn't conscious. It was like some primitive part of my brain suddenly yanked control away from the rest of me and said, "No! I've been hunting for over 30 years, and I've never experienced anything like it before or since." The buck was moving slowly toward the tree line at the far edge of the clearing. I kept him in my scope, thinking maybe I'd get a better angle when he turned. I watched as he approached a stand of pines at the edge of the field, about where an old fence line ran. There was this fence post there I used as a marker sometimes, old wood, about 4.5 feet high. The buck disappeared into the trees, and I started to lower my rifle, figuring I'd missed my chance. But then something else stepped out from behind the same tree where the deer had disappeared. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like when you're looking at something, but your mind can't make sense of it. I remember blinking hard, thinking maybe the fading light was playing tricks on me, but it wasn't. Through my scope, I could see it clearly. It stepped out from behind that tree and took 1 or 2 steps into the clearing. Then it stopped and turned, not its whole body, just its upper half, and looked directly at me. I realized with a shock that I was aiming my rifle directly at its right eye. The thing was massive, not just tall, but thick. Built like a linebacker, but scaled up impossibly. Using that fence post as reference, I could tell it was at least 9 feet tall, maybe more. And it wasn't thin or lanky. It was solid, packed with muscle. The shoulders alone must have been 3 feet across. It was covered in dark hair, not fur exactly, more like hair, dark brown or black, hard to tell in the fading light. The face was, I don't know how to describe it. Not completely human, but not completely animal either. The brow ridge was heavy, and the nose was flat and wide. But the eyes were the worst part. They were dark, but somehow reflective in the low light, and they held intelligence. That's what got me. There was undeniable intelligence in those eyes. I couldn't move. My rifle was still up, still steady, crosshairs right on its eye. I've faced down black bears before, had close calls with moose, but nothing had ever frozen me like this. My heart was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my teeth. I remember whispering under my breath, "Don't do it, buddy. Just keep going." I don't know if I was talking to the creature or to myself. Time seemed to stretch. I don't know how long we stayed like that, probably only seconds, but it felt like hours. My finger was on the trigger, but I knew I wouldn't shoot. Not because I was scared, though I was terrified, but because something told me that would be the worst mistake of my life. Then, without any warning, it turned its attention away from me and back toward the woods. It didn't run or hurry. It just calmly turned the rest of its body to match its head and walked into the trees after the buck. Its gait was smooth, purposeful, not a lumber or a shamble like you'd expect from something that size. It moved like an athlete. When it disappeared into the trees, I stayed frozen for what must have been 5 minutes. I couldn't move. I was shaking so bad I had to put the rifle down because I was afraid I'd accidentally pulled the trigger. My mouth was completely dry, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. The snow was still falling, and it was getting darker by the minute. I knew I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to stand up. What if it came back? What if there were more of them? Finally, self-preservation kicked in. I gathered my gear as quietly as possible, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and started making my way back to my truck. I didn't use my flashlight until I absolutely had to, even though it meant stumbling through the growing darkness. I was terrified of drawing attention to myself. The walk back to my truck normally took about an hour. That day, I made it in 40 minutes, moving as fast as I could while still trying to stay quiet. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, convinced I was being followed. When I finally reached my truck, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I remember sitting there for a moment, engine running, heater blasting, just trying to catch my breath and calm down enough to drive. On the way back to my cabin, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a bear standing on its hind legs. But I know bears. I've hunted them, tracked them, watched them. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that, don't look at you like that. Could it have been another hunter in some kind of ghillie suit? But that didn't make sense either. No human is 9 feet tall with shoulders that wide. And the way it moved, no, it wasn't a person in a suit. I've spent the years since then trying to make sense of what happened. I've read books, watched documentaries, even talked to a few people who claim to have had similar experiences. Some call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others have regional names for it. The local Penobscot tribes have stories about wild men in the forests that go back centuries. I don't know what to call it. All I know is what I saw. I didn't go back to that hunting spot for 3 years after that. When I finally did, I brought 2 friends with me, though I never told them why I wanted the company. I've never seen the creature again, but sometimes when I'm in the woods, I get this feeling of being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stands up, and that same instinct that stopped me from shooting the buck kicks in, telling me it's time to leave. I still hunt, but never alone anymore, and never in that specific area. I've told this story to exactly 4 people in my life: my wife, my brother, and 2 close hunting buddies. My wife thinks I dozed off and had a vivid dream. My brother believes me, but thinks I might have misjudged the size. My hunting buddies, well, they don't say much, but I can tell they think I'm either lying or was seeing things after a long, cold day in the woods. Maybe they're right. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in the fading light and falling snow. Maybe it was just the isolation and the cold getting to me after hours alone in the woods. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt when those eyes looked back at me through my scope. And sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night and the wind is howling outside, I wonder what would have happened if I had pulled that trigger. And I wonder if somewhere in those Maine woods, it remembers me too. Story 7. I still can't believe what happened to me 2 weeks ago. I've been trying to make sense of it ever since, but I can't. I know what I saw. I know what chased me. No one believes me though, not my mom, not my friends. They all think I was drunk or high or something, but I wasn't. I was completely sober when it happened. It was a Thursday night, around 10 o'clock. I'd been at my buddy Jake's place playing video games, nothing crazy, just hanging out. I left his house to walk home like I always do. It's only about a 20-minute walk through our neighborhood in Humboldt. I've made that walk a million times. The night was pretty quiet. That's normal for our town, especially on weeknights. Not much happens here. Most of the houses I passed had their lights off already. It was dark, but not completely blackout. There was a half moon that night, and the streetlights were on, so I could see fine. When I got to Beaver Creek Bridge, I wasn't thinking about anything special. It's just this small bridge that crosses over the creek that feeds into the bigger river. During the day, I fish there all the time. I know that spot like the back of my hand, every deep pool, every shallow riffle. I've caught some decent bass there, even a few catfish. I was about halfway across the bridge when I heard this splash, and not like a little splash that a fish would make jumping for bugs. This was loud, like someone had thrown a bowling ball into the water. It caught my attention right away. I stopped walking and looked over the railing. Couldn't see anything from up there, just the dark water reflecting bits of moonlight. But then I heard another splash. Something was definitely down there. I figured maybe someone was night fishing. People do that sometimes, especially in summer when it's cooler at night. Or maybe some kids were messing around. So I decided to check it out. I walked over to the side of the bridge where there's this little path that leads down to the bank. This is where I made my mistake. I should have just kept walking home. When I got down to the water's edge, I couldn't see anyone. The creek is maybe 30 feet across at that point, not very wide. It was quiet again, just the normal sounds of water flowing and crickets chirping. I was about to head back up to the bridge when I heard another splash, bigger than before, from the middle of the creek. I looked toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the creek was this thing. I don't even know how to describe it properly. It was massive, like way bigger than a person. Maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, with these huge, wide shoulders. It was covered in dark, shaggy hair that hung from its body. Not fur like a bear, more like hair, but thicker and coarser looking. The water was only coming up to its knees, and I know for a fact that part of the creek is 3 to 4 feet deep because I've waded through it plenty of times. At first, my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Was it a bear standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong. Bears don't have those kind of shoulders and the legs were too long. Was it some guy in a costume? No way. Nobody would be standing in the middle of the creek at night in a costume that realistic. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was looking at. It was turned slightly away from me, like it was looking across to the other bank. That's when I stupidly said, "Holy shit," out loud. It wasn't even a conscious decision. The words just came out of my mouth. The thing's head snapped toward me. I'll never forget that moment. Its eyes caught what little light there was and reflected back at me, yellowish, like a cat's eyes, but bigger, much bigger. Then it made this sound. God, that sound. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was this deep, gurgling noise that came from its throat, almost like someone trying to clear thick phlegm, but deeper and louder than any human could make. And then it started moving, toward me. It wasn't even running at first, just striding through the water with purpose, creating these massive splashes with each step. The way it moved, it wasn't clumsy like you'd expect something that big to be. It moved with this terrible confidence. That's when the fear hit me like a truck. I've never felt anything like it. It was this primal terror that just took over. I turned and scrambled up the embankment, digging my fingers into the dirt to pull myself up faster. I could hear it moving through the water behind me, picking up speed. When I reached the top, I sprinted across the train tracks that run parallel to the creek. I was running so fast that I wasn't even watching where I was going. My foot caught on one of the railroad ties, and I went down hard. I felt this sharp pain shoot through my elbow as I hit the ground, but I barely registered it. All I could think about was that thing coming after me. I got back on my feet immediately and kept running. I didn't look back. I was too afraid of what I might see. I just ran as fast as I could all the way home. My lungs were burning and my legs felt like jelly, but I didn't stop until I reached my front door. I burst into the house, probably looking like I'd seen a ghost. My mom was still up watching TV, and she jumped when I came crashing in. I was breathing so hard I could barely speak, but I tried to tell her what happened, about the creature in the creek, about how it had chased me. She just looked at me like I was crazy, asked me if I'd been drinking or smoking something at Jake's house. I kept insisting that I was sober, that what I'd seen was real, but she wouldn't believe me. She just cleaned up my elbow, which was pretty badly scraped and bleeding, and told me to go to bed. Said I'd probably just seen a deer or something and let my imagination run wild. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a deer or a bear or a person, and it wasn't my imagination. The next day, I went back to the spot in the daylight with Jake. I was terrified, but I had to see if there was any evidence, any tracks or signs that something had been there. We didn't find anything conclusive, just some disturbed mud on the bank that could have been made by anything. Jake said I was being paranoid, that I probably just saw some drunk guy wading in the creek, but he wasn't there. He didn't see those eyes looking at him. He didn't hear that gurgling sound. He didn't feel the pure malice coming from that thing. Since that night, I've completely avoided the bridge after dark. I won't even go near that part of town at night anymore. If I'm at Jake's and it gets late, I either get a ride home or I take the long way around, adding an extra 15 minutes to my walk just to avoid that bridge. I've been researching online about similar sightings in our area. There's not much, just a few vague reports from years ago about something large seen in the woods outside town. Nothing as clear or as close as what I experienced. Everyone has this idea that Bigfoot or whatever these creatures are supposed to be are just gentle giants that want to be left alone. That's what all those TV shows portray. But I'm telling you, there was nothing gentle about what I saw. The way it looked at me, the way it charged. If it had caught me, I don't think I'd be here writing this now. I've barely slept since it happened. Every time I close my eyes, I see those reflective eyes staring at me, and I hear that gurgling sound. Sometimes I think I hear something outside my window at night, but when I look, there's nothing there. I don't know what to do with this experience. Nobody believes me. They all think I'm making it up or that I saw something normal and overreacted. But I know what I saw. It was real. It was there in the creek. And the worst part is, I have no way of knowing if it's still out there, waiting. Last night, I thought I heard that same gurgling sound from somewhere in the distance while I was taking the trash out. I ran back inside so fast, I dropped the garbage all over the driveway. My mom yelled at me for making a mess, but how could I explain? I'm not crazy. I'm not on drugs. I know what I saw that night at Beaver Creek Bridge, and it wasn't human. Whatever it was, it wanted to hurt me. And I can't shake the feeling that someday it's going to find me again. Story 8. I've never really told this story outside my close friends, but it's been over 40 years now, and I still think about it sometimes when I can't sleep. Summer of '81 changed how I look at the woods forever. I was 15 then, and I knew those forests around Randall like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. There were 6 of us camping that weekend in July. Me, Mark, my cousin Jake, and 4 friends from school, Darren, Scott, Kevin, and Todd. We'd gone to this spot on the Cowlitz River probably a dozen times. Before, it was this perfect little clearing near where an old power line cut through, maybe 2 miles off any logging road. You had to know it was there. My dad had shown me years earlier, said it was the best spot for early morning trout fishing. We'd hiked in that afternoon with our gear, just basic stuff, sleeping bags, cooler with hot dogs and sodas, fishing tackle. We built this half-assed lean-to out of fallen branches and a tarp, got a fire going, and spent the evening just being stupid teenagers. No booze or anything. We were straight-edge kids from religious families, believe it or not. Just ghost stories and bragging about girls none of us had actually kissed. It was getting dark, probably between 9 and 10 at night. The fire was still going strong and we were all sitting around it. The woods get really dark out there. No light pollution, and the trees block out what little moonlight there is. Beyond our fire circle was just blackness. I remember Jake was in the middle of some bullshit story about his cousin who supposedly worked for Nintendo and knew all the secret codes for games that weren't even out yet. That's when I first heard it. Footsteps, coming from the east side of our camp, where this little creek fed into the river. My first thought was bear. We'd seen black bears in the area before. But something felt immediately wrong. Bears kind of lumber around, make random noises. This was rhythmic, like steady footsteps. 2 feet, walking through brush. Deliberate. I held up my hand and Jake stopped talking. "You guys hear that?" I whispered. Everyone froze. That's when the smell hit us. Holy shit, that smell! I've smelled dead deer, rotting fish, all kinds of nasty stuff in the woods. This wasn't like that. It was pungent and sour, like sweet rot and wet fur, combined with something I can't even describe. It made my eyes water. I'd been around black bears before. They have this musky smell, but this was 10 times stronger and just wrong. The footsteps got closer. We could hear branches snapping, brush being pushed aside. Nobody said a word. I remember my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then we saw it, or rather, we saw its outline. Just beyond our firelight, maybe 30 feet away, this massive shape moving slowly along the edge of the clearing. The way it moved, long, heavy arm swings. It never came close enough for us to see details, but we could clearly make out its silhouette against the trees when the fire flickered just right. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, broad through the shoulders and chest, way bigger than any man. It was walking upright, but not like a person. There was something off about its gait, more fluid but also more powerful. None of us spoke. I don't think any of us breathed. My friend Todd was closest to it, and I remember seeing tears streaming down his face, but he didn't make a sound. We all just sat there, paralyzed. This thing patrolled just outside our circle of firelight for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 10 minutes. It moved from east to west, then looped around south of our camp, before following the creek downriver. It never approached us directly, but it knew we were there. I felt watched, assessed. When it finally moved away, the footsteps gradually fading into the distance, none of us moved for at least another 30 minutes. Even after it was gone, that smell lingered in the air. Finally, Kevin whispered, "What the fuck was that?" None of us answered. We didn't say Bigfoot or Sasquatch or anything. Saying it would have made it real, and I don't think any of us were ready for that. We just stared at the fire and occasionally glanced at the darkness beyond. We took turns staying awake that night. Nobody suggested packing up and leaving. The thought of walking through those woods in the dark was worse than staying put. I don't think any of us actually slept more than a few minutes at a time. I kept the fire blazing all night, using up all our wood way too fast. The weird thing is, when morning came, we didn't go look for tracks. You'd think that would be the first thing curious teenagers would do, right? But we didn't want to know. We packed up our stuff in record time, barely speaking to each other. We fished further downstream that day, within sight of each other at all times, and headed home early. On the drive back, packed into Darren's mum's station wagon, we finally talked about it a little, but even then we danced around it. That was weird last night. Yeah, super weird. Probably just a bear, right? Yeah, a bear. A really big bear. But we knew. We all knew it wasn't a bear. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about how that thing moved, so deliberate, so aware. I'd find myself staring out my bedroom window at night, wondering if it was out there in the tree line. The strangest part? We never really talked about it again after that summer. It was like we all made this unspoken agreement to just not mention it. We stayed friends through high school, but whenever someone suggested camping, there was always an excuse not to go. Years later in college, I started reading reports from Lewis and Skamania counties from that time period. There were other sightings that summer, descriptions of something large moving through the forests at night. The details matched, the size, the gait, the overwhelming stench, that feeling of being watched by something intelligent. Reading those accounts gave me chills because I realized it wasn't just us. I've been back to the Cowlitz many times since then, but never to that specific spot. I fish different areas now, always in daylight, always with at least one other person. I tell myself it's because I found better fishing holes, but that's bullshit. I'm scared of what might still be there. Last year I took my own son fishing on the Cowlitz, a good 10 miles downstream from our old spot. He's 13 now, asking to go camping with his friends. I found myself making up excuses why they shouldn't go alone. Bears in the area, I told him, need more experience first. What bothers me most after all these years isn't just what we saw. It's that feeling that it was studying us, watching our reactions, testing our boundaries. Whatever walked the perimeter of our camp that night wasn't just some animal following instinct. There was purpose there, intelligence. Sometimes I wonder if we were lucky, if maybe it was just curious, not hungry, not aggressive. What if it had decided to come closer? 6 scrawny teenagers would have had no chance against something that size. I've told myself all the rational explanations. A bear walking on hind legs, some guy in a suit playing a prank, mass hysteria among suggestible teens. But none of that explains the deliberate way it moved, or that ungodly smell, or why 6 different people all saw and experienced exactly the same thing. I'm 56 years old now. I've been married 30 years, raised 3 kids, built a construction business. I'm not prone to flights of fancy. But to this day, I sleep with my bedroom curtains closed. I don't like the idea of looking out into the darkness and seeing something looking back. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still smell that sickly, sweet, rotting stench. In those moments, I'm 15 again, frozen in place, watching something impossible move just beyond the light, knowing deep down that the woods hold secrets we're not meant to understand. I don't know what was on the Cowlitz River that night in '81. I just know that whatever it was, it changed something fundamental in how I see the world. And sometimes, knowledge like that is a burden you carry forever. Story 9. I still don't know what to make of what happened 2 nights ago. I'm writing this down partly because I need to process it, and partly because I'm hoping someone here might have experienced something similar. I've been lurking in this community for a while, but I never thought I'd be posting my own encounter. It was February 25th, just after midnight. I'd been working late at my desk, which sits near the front door of my house. Nothing unusual about the night, just me catching up on some paperwork after a long day. My desk faces away from the door, but I can turn around and see it easily enough. Around 12:15 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. It's a habit of mine to glance out the front door window whenever I walk past. Something I picked up during my time in the military, I guess. Just a quick check of my surroundings. Usually, there's nothing to see except my front yard and the streetlight at the corner. That night was different. As I passed the door, I looked through that wide rectangular window, the one that's about eye level for me, and froze. There was something sitting at the bottom of my porch stairs. I'm going to try to describe what I saw as accurately as possible, but words don't really do it justice. It looked like some nightmarish version of Cousin It from the Addams Family, mixed with what people describe as Sasquatch. The entire body was covered in this dark, matted hair, almost black, but not quite. It was thick, tangled, and completely obscured any features underneath. I couldn't see a face at all. The hair was just too dense. What really struck me were its hands. They were disproportionately long compared to its body, with these elongated fingers, all covered in the same thick, dark hair. I couldn't see any skin anywhere on this thing. I'm not some jumpy person who sees monsters in shadows. The streetlight gives enough illumination that I could see my entire front yard clearly. This wasn't a shadow or trick of light. There was something physically there, sitting on the ground at the bottom of my porch steps. I'm 6 feet tall, and the window, in my door, is about 5 feet from the ground. Based on how this thing's head reached about my belly button level when viewed through that window, while it was sitting down, I estimate it must have been around 8 feet tall if standing. The way it was positioned, it seemed to be facing my door, just sitting there, looking at my house, at me. I stood frozen for maybe 5 seconds, my heart pounding in my ears. Then my brain kicked in. I'm not someone who runs from things. I've been in actual combat zones. So my first thought was to document this. My phone was charging across the room, but my digital camera was right there on my desk. I backed away from the door slowly, never taking my eyes off the window, then turned and grabbed my camera. It couldn't have been more than 10 seconds before I was back at the door, camera ready. It was gone. I pressed my face against the glass, scanning the yard. Nothing. No movement in the bushes around the perimeter, no sign anything had been there at all. I stood there for nearly a minute, trying to process what I'd just seen. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I turned on the porch light, unlocked the door, and stepped outside to look around. The night was completely still. No unusual sounds, no footprints on the ground, no disturbance in the thin layer of frost that had formed on the grass. I walked all the way around my house, checking every corner of my yard. Nothing. It was as if whatever I'd seen had simply vanished into thin air. When I went back inside, I sat at my desk and tried to make sense of it. I've traveled extensively, both during my military service and afterwards. I've seen some strange things in my time, but they've always had explanations. Always. I pride myself on being level-headed and logical. This defied logic. I was still sitting there, trying to rationalize what I'd seen when I heard it. A deep rumbling sound, softer than thunder, but with the same kind of vibration you feel in your chest. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. About 30 seconds later, it happened again. This continued for about 5 minutes, just long enough for me to rule out passing trucks or neighbors moving furniture. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I couldn't pinpoint a direction. It felt like it was surrounding the house, or maybe coming from underneath it. I checked the local news and weather sites on my phone, thinking maybe there was some kind of seismic activity, but there was nothing. No reports of anything unusual in my area. By around 1 a.m., both the creature and the sounds were gone, and I was left questioning my sanity. I didn't sleep that night. I kept my eyes on that door until sunrise, half expecting to see that hair-covered thing staring back at me through the window, but it never returned. The next morning, I checked my yard again in daylight. Still no signs of disturbance, no unusual tracks, nothing out of place. I asked my nearest neighbor if they'd heard any strange sounds around midnight, and they just looked at me like I was crazy. I'm not prone to hallucinations. I don't use drugs. I rarely drink, and I wasn't particularly tired that night. I know what I saw, but I also know how impossible it sounds. What bothers me most is the casual way it was just sitting there, like it belonged, like it was waiting for something. For me? I don't know. I've been trying to research similar sightings online. The closest things I can find are accounts of Sasquatch or skunk ape sightings, but those descriptions never mention the complete covering of hair with no visible face, and they certainly don't mention creatures that can vanish without a trace in seconds. I've installed a security camera pointing at my front porch now. If it comes back, I'll have evidence, but part of me hopes it doesn't return. The image of that thing sitting at the bottom of my stairs is burned into my memory. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see the outline of its body, that mass of dark hair, those unnaturally long hands. I keep thinking about how it disappeared so completely in the few seconds it took me to grab my camera. No creature that size should be able to move so quickly and quietly. Where did it go? How did it leave no trace? And those sounds, that deep, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. What was that? Was it related to the creature or just a coincidence? I'm not sleeping well. Every noise outside makes me tense up. I find myself constantly checking the front door window, expecting to see that hair-covered thing staring back at me. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to explain it away. Maybe it was a bear with some kind of skin condition that caused excessive hair growth. Maybe it was someone in a costume playing a prank. Maybe it was a shadow cast by something I didn't notice. But none of those explanations fit what I saw. None of them explain how it vanished so completely in seconds or the strange sounds that followed. I've seen some shit in my time. I've been in situations where I genuinely feared for my life. But something about this encounter has shaken me in a way that combat never did. There's something deeply unsettling about having the unexplainable show up at your doorstep. It's been 2 days now, and nothing else has happened. No more sightings, no more strange sounds. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that whatever that thing was, it knows where I live. It knows I saw it. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if it's watching me right now, from somewhere just out of sight. Waiting for what? I don't know. And that's what scares me most. I'm writing this partly to document what happened while it's still fresh in my mind, but also because I'm hoping someone here might recognize what I'm describing. Has anyone else seen something like this? Does this match any known cryptid or phenomenon? I need answers. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. Most of all, I need to know if I should be preparing for it to come back, because if it does, I want to be ready. I just have no idea how to prepare for something I can't even identify. Story 10. I still get goosebumps talking about this. I'm 58 now, but what happened when I was 10 is as clear as if it happened yesterday. Some things just burn themselves into your memory, you know. It was September of '77, and I was staying at my grandmother's house in rural Michigan. Her property backed up to this huge stretch of woods that seemed to go on forever. My cousins and I had been building a cabin in those woods all summer long. Not a real cabin, obviously. We were just kids. But it felt like the most important project in the world to us. My Aunt Sarah would take us out there almost every day. She'd pack these amazing picnic lunches with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, potato chips, and those little juice boxes. We'd spend hours hammering nails into boards, collecting rocks for a makeshift fire pit, and gathering branches to build walls. It wasn't much, but to us 10-year-olds, it was a palace. This particular day was unusually warm for September. The leaves were just starting to change, with hints of orange and yellow peppered through the green. My aunt had brought me and my cousin Tommy out to work on the cabin. We'd been there since morning, and I remember my hands were getting sore from pulling at stubborn branches. I was gathering some sticks near the edge of our little clearing when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of twigs snapping under someone's weight. It wasn't just one snap, but several in quick succession, like someone or something was walking. I turned toward the sound, expecting to see my older cousin Jimmy, who sometimes came out to join us. What I saw instead was just a quick flash of something light brown moving between the trees, maybe 30 yards away. It was tall, that's what struck me, but it moved so fast I couldn't make out details. I figured it was Jimmy in his tan jacket coming to surprise us. "Jimmy," I called out, but there was no answer. I shrugged it off and went back to the cabin. We worked until the sun started to dip, and my aunt called us to pack up. On the walk back to Grandma's house, I mentioned seeing Jimmy in the woods. "Jimmy?" My aunt looked confused. "He's been at baseball practice all day." When we got back to the house, there was Jimmy sitting on the porch in his bright blue team uniform. not a speck of brown on him. I felt this weird chill crawl up my spine, but I told myself it was probably just a neighbor kid wandering through the woods, or maybe a deer, though I'd never seen a deer move quite like that. The following weekend, we went back. This time both Tommy and Jimmy came along with me and Aunt Sarah. It was another gorgeous day, and after lunch we decided to explore a bit. There was this trail we liked that led up and then down an incline to where some huge grapevines hung from the trees. We'd spend hours swinging on them, pretending to be Tarzan. The boys raced ahead and I followed behind, taking my time and looking for cool rocks to add to my collection. When I reached the grapevines, Tommy and Jimmy were already climbing and swinging. I laughed at their monkey noises and was about to join them when something caught my eye. About 20 feet away, sitting against an old fence post that marked the edge of someone's long-abandoned property, was something. I couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was like my brain couldn't make sense of it. It was sitting with its knees pulled up to its chest, arms wrapped around them. The whole body was covered in shaggy, light brown hair. Not fur exactly, but not like human hair either. Something in between. Its face was hard to make out clearly because of the hair, but I could see dark eyes watching us. Just watching, not moving, not making a sound. I froze. My heart felt like it stopped and then suddenly started hammering so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. My mouth went completely dry. When I finally managed to scream, it came out as this strangled, high-pitched sound I didn't even recognize as my own voice. Tommy looked over at me first, confused by my scream, then followed my gaze. "Holy crap!" he yelled, and that's when we both started running. I didn't even think about Jimmy. Instinct just took over. We tore up that incline, slipping and scrambling in the dirt. I looked back just once, and the thing had stood up. It was tall, so tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet. I couldn't tell if it was coming after us because I couldn't bear to look again. We ran straight into Aunt Sarah, who was heading down the trail to find us. We were crying and babbling about a monster, a hairy man, something in the woods. She thought we were playing a game at first, but our terror was too real. Jimmy came running up behind us, confused about why we'd taken off without him. He hadn't seen anything. He'd been on the other side of a thick clump of trees when it happened. Aunt Sarah tried to calm us down, saying it was probably just a man hunting in the woods, or maybe someone homeless passing through. But the look in her eyes told me she didn't believe that any more than we did. No person would sit like that, watching children covered in hair, not saying anything. We packed up immediately. Nobody suggested going to look, not even Jimmy, who was usually the brave one. The walk back to Grandma's house was silent, except for our heavy breathing. I kept looking over my shoulder, certain I could feel eyes on my back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old farmhouse made me jump. I kept picturing those dark eyes watching me through the window. When I finally did fall asleep, I dreamed of running through endless woods, always being watched. We never went back to that cabin, not ever. Aunt Sarah made excuses about being too busy or the weather being too cold, but I knew the real reason. Even as adults, Tommy and I have never really talked about what we saw that day. It's like if we don't talk about it, maybe it wasn't real. But it was real. I know what I saw. Years later, when I was in high school, I read an article about Bigfoot sightings in Michigan. The descriptions, the height, the light brown hair, the way it moved, it all matched. But I'm not saying that's what we saw. I don't know what we saw. All I know is that something was out there in those woods, something that had no business being there. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was just a man in a costume playing a prank. Maybe it was a bear sitting in an unusual position. Maybe my 10-year-old imagination exaggerated the memory over time. But then I remember the absolute stillness of it. The way it just sat there, watching us with what felt like intelligence. No animal watches you like that, and no human would sit silently in the woods, covered in hair, staring at children without saying a word. I've never been comfortable in the woods since then. Even now, when I take my own kids camping, I insist on staying in designated campgrounds with plenty of other people around. I never let them wander off alone. My husband thinks I'm overprotective, but he didn't see what I saw. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, if it's still watching from the trees when people venture too deep into the woods. If other children have stumbled across it and run home with stories that their parents dismiss as imagination. The cabin we were building probably rotted away decades ago. Grandma's house was sold after she passed. I've never been back to those woods and never will. Some places, once you leave them, should stay in the past. But the memory doesn't stay in the past. It's always there, just under the surface. When I'm alone in the dark and hear an unexpected noise. When I'm hiking and catch movement in my peripheral vision. When my kids beg to explore the wooded area behind our house and I make up excuses why they can't. Because I know something's out there, something that doesn't belong, something that watches and waits. And 48 years later, I still don't know what it was or what it wanted. I just know that on that warm September day in '77, something impossible happened, something that changed me forever. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear the snap of twigs and feel those eyes watching me through the darkness. Story 11. I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's therapy. Maybe I just need someone to believe me. It's been nearly 10 years, but what happened that day at Sand Hill Station still gives me nightmares. It was late August 2014, just after I'd graduated from UW-Madison. I needed to clear my head before diving into the job hunt, so I decided to take my pit bull Luna camping. Luna was my rock. A beautiful grey and white pit bull with these soulful eyes that could read your mood better than any human. We'd been together since she was a puppy, and she'd never once given me reason to doubt her instincts. We arrived at Sand Hill Station on a Tuesday afternoon. The campground wasn't crowded, which was exactly what I wanted. Peace and quiet, just me and my dog in the Wisconsin wilderness. The weather was perfect. Warm but not hot, with that golden late summer light that makes everything look like a postcard. But something was off. From the moment we pulled into the parking area, Luna, who normally went absolutely crazy at the sight of trees and open space, wouldn't get out of the car. She just sat in the back seat, staring out the window with her ears perked forward. "Come on, girl, let's go set up," I said, opening the door for her. She reluctantly jumped down, but stayed pressed against my leg as we walked to the camping area. I figured maybe she was just tired from the drive. I found a nice spot near the edge of a clearing, about 50 yards from where the meadow met the forest. The tall grass swayed in the breeze, and beyond it, the dense woods created this wall of green and shadow. I set up my tent, arranged the campsite, and got a fire pit ready for later, while Luna watched everything with unusual intensity. By late afternoon, I thought some exercise might snap her out of her weird mood. I grabbed her favorite frisbee, and for a few minutes everything felt normal again. She was running, jumping, catching it mid-air like she always did. Then something changed. Luna froze mid-run, her body suddenly rigid. Her head turned toward the meadow where the tall grass met the tree line. Before I could call her name, she bolted, not playfully, but with purpose, like she was chasing something or running towards something. "Luna, come back!" I shouted, jogging after her. She stopped at the edge of the tall grass, her body low to the ground, hackles raised. I'd never seen her like this. As I approached, I could hear her growling, not her normal "there's a squirrel" growl, but something deeper, more primal. Her entire body was quivering. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, slowly moving closer. That's when I felt it. This dread, like someone had poured ice water down my spine. There was nothing visibly threatening, just tall grass waving in the breeze and the dark line of trees beyond. But every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. I grabbed Luna's collar, trying to gently pull her away. "Come on, let's go back to camp." That's when we heard it. The only way I can describe the sound is like a rhino charging through the forest. Heavy, powerful movement crashing through underbrush, branches snapping, vegetation being crushed, and I swear I could feel the ground vibrate beneath my feet. Whatever it was big, and it was moving fast. Luna erupted into the most vicious barking I'd ever heard from her. Not just aggressive, it was desperate, like she was trying to warn off something that terrified her. The noise in the forest suddenly changed direction, moving away from us at incredible speed. I practically dragged Luna back to the campsite. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold her leash. I told myself it was probably just a deer, maybe a bear, though bears don't usually move that fast through dense forest. Plus, the wildlife in Wisconsin is pretty tame. You respect it, it respects you. But this felt different. Wrong. As the sun set, I built up the campfire, hoping the light and heat would provide some comfort. Luna wouldn't settle. She kept pacing the perimeter of our campsite, stopping every few minutes to stare into the darkness, her ears constantly moving, tracking sounds I couldn't hear. I cooked some hot dogs over the fire and gave Luna her food, but she barely touched it. That was when I really started to worry. Luna never refused food. Ever. "It's okay, girl," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Nothing's going to bother us." Around 10, I decided to turn in for the night. Maybe things would seem less ominous in the morning. I zipped Luna and myself into the tent, switched on my small lantern, and tried to read a bit on my Kindle to distract myself. Luna didn't sleep. She kept lifting her head, her ears twitching at sounds I couldn't detect. Every time she did this, I'd stop reading and listen, but all I could hear was the normal nighttime forest sounds. Crickets, the occasional owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I must have fallen asleep around midnight despite my unease. I woke up suddenly, no idea what time it was, but it was still pitch black outside. Luna was pressed against me, her entire body trembling, not shivering from cold, but shaking with fear. And then I heard it, voices, or not exactly voices, chatter, like someone or something was having a conversation just outside our tent, maybe 10 feet away. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. The sounds were odd, almost like clicks and hisses formed into words. The cadence was all wrong for human speech, too rapid, then too slow with strange pauses. The worst part? The sound kept moving positions without any footsteps, like whatever was making the noise could teleport from one spot to another. It would be on one side of the tent, then suddenly on the other, with no sound of movement in between. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. Luna was frozen against me, only her eyes moving as she tracked the sounds. "Hello?" I finally called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Who's there?" The chattering stopped instantly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I crawled to the small window flap of the tent and slowly unzipped it just enough to peek out. The campfire had died down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to see the edge of the clearing. And there, right where the meadow met the forest, was something. It was on all fours, but not like a bear or any four-legged animal, more like a human who had chosen to move that way. Its proportions were all wrong. The limbs were too long, jointed in places they shouldn't be. What I initially thought was fur was actually matted, tangled hair. Not animal hair, but something more like human hair gone wild. It was moving along the perimeter of the clearing, stopping occasionally to smell, taste. I couldn't tell. But it was methodical, deliberate, hunting. Then it stopped and turned its face toward our tent. Even in the dim light, I could see its features were wider than a human's should be, with an unusually broad nose and eyes that reflected the dying firelight like an animal's. But it wasn't an animal. It wasn't human either. It was something in between. It opened its mouth and made a hissing sound directly at our tent. Then, with a movement that was too fluid, too quick for something its size, it slipped between the tall grasses of the meadow and was gone. I fell back from the window, my body numb with terror. Luna whimpered and burrowed against me. Neither of us moved for what felt like hours. When dawn finally broke, I packed up camp faster than I ever have in my life. Luna didn't need any encouragement to get back in the car. We were on the road by 6:30 in the morning. I've gone over that night 1,000 times in my head. Was it some kind of primitive human living in the woods? A creature science hasn't discovered? Was I half asleep and imagining things? But Luna saw it too. She felt it. And Luna wasn't one to be spooked by normal forest creatures. I never went back to Sandhill Station. I couldn't bring myself to. Luna passed away 2 years ago. Old age, nothing sinister. But until her last day, she would still occasionally freeze and stare at the tree line behind my house with that same alertness she showed that night. I've looked online for similar encounters in the area, but found nothing conclusive. Just vague stories from hunters about strange noises and feelings of being watched. Nothing as direct as what I experienced. I still live in Wisconsin, but I don't go camping anymore. And when I drive past forests at night, I don't look too closely at the spaces between the trees. Some things are better left unseen, and whatever was at Sandhill Station that night is one of them. Story 12. I still find it hard to talk about what I saw that day in '92, but here goes. Maybe writing it down will help make sense of it, though I doubt it. Some things just don't fit into the world as we know it. I've been hunting Michigan's woods since I was 12. My dad took me out for my first deer season back in '76, and I never looked back. By '92, I was 38 and had a good 26 years of experience under my belt. I'd seen just about everything the northern Michigan wilderness had to offer, or so I thought. That year, my buddy Jim and I had set up 4 bear bait sites near Lewiston. We'd been hunting partners for almost a decade by then, and we had our routine down pat. We spaced our sites across about a 30-mile radius, checking and refreshing them every few days. 3 of the sites were just normal spots in the woods, nothing special, nothing weird. But that 4th site in Red Oak Township, something wasn't right with that place from the start. The site was off this winding 2-track that snaked through thick woods, up a pretty steep hill, then down toward a swampy area. It was remote, which is exactly what you want for bear baiting. I'd walk in about 200 yards from where I parked, carrying these 5-gallon buckets filled with meat scraps, old pastries, and whatever else bears might find tasty. Every time I went to that particular site, the hair on my neck would stand up. You know that feeling when you're absolutely certain someone's watching you. It was like that, but amplified. I mentioned it to Jim once and he laughed it off, said I was getting jumpy in my old age. But he didn't like going to that site alone either, though he never admitted it outright. It was early September, just a few days before bear season opened. Jim couldn't make it that day. His kid had some school thing, so I was on my own checking all 4 sites. The first 3 were business as usual. I refreshed the bait, checked for signs of activity, made some minor adjustments to our setup. Normal stuff. Then I got to Red Oak. It was about 4 in the afternoon. The day was overcast but warm. Typical Michigan early fall weather. I remember parking my truck at the usual spot where the 2-track widened enough to pull off. I grabbed my buckets of bait and my backpack with tools and headed in. The walk to the bait site was uneventful. I noticed some good bear sign, fresh scat, claw marks on trees, which meant our bait was drawing them in. Good news for the upcoming season. I dumped the fresh bait, buried some of it under logs like we always did to make the bears work for it, and started heading back to my truck. The forest thinned out a bit as I got closer to the 2-track. I was about 60 yards from my truck, just walking along, thinking about whether I needed to stop for gas on the way home when it happened. Something, and I'm still not comfortable calling it anything more specific, crossed the 2-track road in a single stride. 1 step, across a road that had to be at least 7 feet wide. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The thing was huge, maybe 7 to 8 feet tall, dark-colored, moving with purpose, but not running. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself. I wasn't even aware I'd spoken out loud. I've seen plenty of bears in my life. Black bears in Michigan, even encountered a grizzly once on a hunting trip out west. This was no bear, not even close. I stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. My heart was hammering in my chest. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn around, run back the other way, get far away from whatever I'd just seen. But my truck was right there, and running deeper into the woods seemed like a bad idea. So I started walking again, slower now, eyes darting everywhere. I got to the spot where the thing had crossed the road and stopped. There were no tracks that I could see on the hard-packed dirt of the 2-track, but the leaves on both sides were disturbed. Then it hit me, this overwhelming feeling of dread. Not just fear, but a deep, primal certainty that something terrible was about to happen. In all my years in the woods, I'd never felt anything like it. It was like someone had suddenly cranked the volume on all my senses. The woods seemed quieter than they should have been. No birds, no squirrels chattering. I looked to my right, in the direction the thing had gone, and that's when I saw it. About 30 feet back behind a large cedar tree, partially obscured but definitely there, was a face looking at me. Not a human face, not a bear face either. It reminded me of pictures I'd seen of mountain gorillas, but wrong somehow. Darker. The eyes were what got me. They were aware, intelligent, watching me with what I can only describe as cold calculation. I blinked hard, convinced I must be seeing things. Told myself it was just shadows playing tricks, or my mind filling in patterns that weren't really there. But when I opened my eyes, it was still there, still watching me. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 15 seconds or so. I couldn't move, couldn't call out, couldn't do anything but stand there, my body refusing to respond to any commands from my brain. Then, without any warning, it simply turned away and moved deeper into the forest. No sound, no dramatic exit, just gone. The dense undergrowth swallowed it up like it had never been there at all. I stood there for another minute, trying to get my breathing under control. My legs felt like jelly. I had this crazy thought that if I moved, it would somehow trigger the thing to come back. Eventually, self-preservation kicked in, and I made myself walk, not run, though every fiber of my being wanted to sprint, to my truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I started the engine and got out of there as fast as the rutted 2-track would allow. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that thing burst out of the woods behind me. When I got back to the main road, I pulled over and just sat there trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I'd always scoffed at Bigfoot stories, always figured they were just bears standing on their hind legs or peoples. Imaginations running wild after too many beers around the campfire. I'd been hunting Michigan's woods for decades and never seen anything unusual. But what I saw that day wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. They don't have that kind of face. And they sure as hell don't cross a road in a single step. The height, 7 to 8 feet at least. The dark coloration. The face that was like some nightmarish hybrid between a man and a gorilla. The way it moved, silent and deliberate. And that feeling, that overwhelming sense of dread and doom that washed over me. I've tried to rationalize it 1,000 times since then. Tried to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe even a person in some kind of costume. Though who would be out in the middle of nowhere dressed like that? I couldn't tell you. Nothing fits. Nothing makes sense. I called Jim that night, tried to explain what I'd seen. He thought I was pulling his leg at first, then suggested maybe I'd gotten overheated or dehydrated. I let him think that. It was easier than trying to convince him. We went back to that site together 2 days later. I didn't want to. But I also couldn't just abandon our setup with season opening in a few days. Jim checked for tracks or signs while I stood nervously by the truck, shotgun in hand. He didn't find anything conclusive, just some broken branches and disturbed undergrowth that could have been caused by anything. We hunted that season, even took a decent bear from one of our other sites. But I never went back to that Red Oak Township location alone. And when the season ended, I insisted we take down that bait site and find a different spot for the next year. Jim didn't argue much. I think he could tell from my face that something had really shaken me. It's been over 30 years now, and I've never told many people about what I saw. The few I've told either think I'm making it up or suggest I mistook a bear for something else. I've been hunting for almost 50 years. I know what a bear looks like, even in poor light or unusual circumstances. The thing that bothers me most, even now, is that feeling of dread that came over me. It wasn't just fear of a large, potentially dangerous animal. It was deeper than that, more existential somehow. Like I was suddenly aware that the world wasn't what I'd always thought it was. That there were things out there, at least one thing, that shouldn't exist, but did. I still hunt, still spend time in the woods. But I've never gone back to that part of Red Oak Township, and sometimes, when I'm alone in the forest and the light starts to fade, I catch myself scanning the trees, looking for that face, wondering if it's out there, watching, wondering if it remembers me the way I remember it. I don't know what I saw that day. I don't have a name for it that doesn't sound ridiculous. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and for those few moments when our eyes met across that forest clearing, it knew me just as surely as I knew it had no business existing in the Michigan woods I thought I knew so well. Story 13. I still can't explain what I saw that day. It's been over 10 years now, and I've gone back and forth between telling myself I imagined it and knowing deep down that I didn't. I've been fishing my whole life, 43 years on the water, and I've never seen anything like it before or since. It was April 22nd, 2014. The date is burned into my memory because it was my day off, and I'd been looking forward to getting out on Lake Full Hollow for weeks. I live about 30 minutes from Show Low, Arizona, and I try to get out on the water whenever I can. That spring had been particularly busy at the hardware store I manage, so this was my first real chance to decompress. I loaded up my 12-foot aluminum boat that morning. Nothing fancy, just a simple fishing boat with a small outboard motor that served me well for almost 15 years. The weather report mentioned possible thunderstorms later in the day, but the morning looked clear enough that I figured I'd get a good 6 hours on the water before anything rolled in. I launched around 7 in the morning. The lake wasn't crowded at all. A Tuesday in April isn't exactly peak season. There were maybe 2 other boats on the water when I started, and they were staying near the main launch area. I headed toward my favorite spot around the bend, where the lake forms this L shape. It's quieter there, and I've always had better luck catching trout in that section. For the first few hours, everything was perfectly normal. I caught a couple of decent-sized rainbow trout, nothing spectacular, but enough to make the trip worthwhile. Around noon, I noticed the weather starting to change. The sky to the west was getting dark, and I could see clouds building up over the mountains. I wasn't too concerned yet. Storms move through pretty quickly in this part of Arizona, but I kept an eye on it. By 1 o'clock, I could see lightning flashing in the distance, still maybe 15 or 20 miles away. The wind had picked up, creating small whitecaps on the water. That's when I started feeling off. I can't really explain it better than that. It wasn't anything specific, just this creeping uneasiness that settled over me. At first, I thought it was just the approaching storm making me nervous. I've been caught in bad weather on the water before, and it's never fun. But this felt different. The hair on my arms was standing up, and not from the electricity in the air. It felt like I was being watched. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that feeling, but out on the open water it was unexpected. I decided it was time to head back to the eastern shore where I'd launched. I started up my motor and began making my way across the water. The sky was getting darker by the minute, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder now. As I rounded the bend of the L shape, I glanced toward the northwestern shoreline, where there's a small clearing before the tree line. That's when I spotted it. My first thought was that it was a bear. We get black bears in the area all the time, and from a distance, that's exactly what it looked like. A large, dark figure that had come down to the water's edge, probably to drink. I actually slowed my boat down a bit, turning slightly to get a better look. I've seen plenty of bears in my life, but it's always cool to observe them in their natural habitat from a safe distance. But as I adjusted my angle, something felt wrong about what I was seeing. The proportions weren't right for a bear. It was dark brownish red, darker than an orangutan, but definitely not black. The fur looked thick but clean, not matted or ragged like you often see on bears this time of year when they're shedding their winter coats. Then it stood up. I felt my stomach drop. This was no bear. Whatever I was looking at was standing upright on two legs, completely vertical like a human. But it was huge, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. It had noticeably long arms that hung down at its sides, reaching what looked like the middle of its thighs. I was maybe 100 yards from shore, and even at that distance I could tell this thing was massive. Its body posture was slightly hunched forward at the shoulders, not like a person with bad posture, but like something designed to stand that way, like its natural state. Then it turned toward me. It didn't turn its head. It rotated its entire upper body in my direction. I couldn't make out facial features clearly at that distance, but I had the distinct impression it was looking directly at me. I froze, my hand still on the throttle of my idling motor. For what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, we just stayed like that, me in my boat, this thing on the shore, regarding each other. Then, as casually as you please, it turned away from me and started walking toward the trees behind it. That's when it really hit me what I was seeing. The way it moved was so deliberate, so fluid. It reminded me immediately of that famous Patterson-Gimlin film of Bigfoot that everybody's seen. That same powerful, confident stride, not lumbering like a bear, not bounding like a deer or elk, walking, but with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Its legs were thick and muscular, clearly visible as it moved away from me. Its build was too big, too open to be any known animal. I kept thinking, that's a man in a suit, but even as the thought formed, I knew it wasn't true. No human could move like that in a costume, and no costume I've ever seen has that kind of natural movement to the fur. The wind was blowing across the lake, and I could see the hair on its body rippling slightly with the breeze. As it reached the tree line, I tried to track it visually, desperate to keep it in sight. But once it moved into the shadows of the forest, it vanished from view completely. There was no crashing sound, no breaking branches. It just disappeared into the woods like a ghost. I sat there for what must have been a full minute, my boat gently rocking on the increasingly choppy water, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wanted to move closer to shore, to maybe find tracks or some other evidence. But another part, the part that's kept me alive through hunting trips and military service, was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. A crack of lightning much closer than before made the decision for me. The storm was moving in fast now, with dark clouds directly overhead and lightning flashing all around the lake. I turned my boat around and opened up the throttle as much as I dared on the increasingly rough water. The entire way back to the launch point, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that thing following along the shoreline, or maybe even swimming after me. Nothing like that happened, but the feeling of being watched never left me until I had my boat loaded on my trailer and was driving away from the lake. I didn't tell anyone what I saw for almost a week. What would I say? Hey, I saw Bigfoot down at Lake Full Hollow. I'd be the laughingstock of Show Low. But the image of that thing standing up and turning toward me kept replaying in my mind, keeping me up at night. Finally, I mentioned it to my buddy Mark, who I've known since high school and who I trust not to think I'm completely insane. He listened without interrupting, then asked me if I'd been drinking on the lake. I hadn't. I never drink while boating. He suggested maybe the storm and the lighting conditions had played tricks on my eyes, that maybe it was just a bear standing momentarily on its hind legs. But bears don't stand like that, and they don't walk like that. They certainly don't move through dense forest without making noise. Whatever I saw moved with purpose and awareness that no bear possesses. I've been back to Lake Full Hollow dozens of times since then. Sometimes I fish in the same spot, always keeping one eye on that section of shoreline. I've never seen anything like it again, but sometimes, especially when the weather is changing and storms are brewing, I get that same feeling of being watched. I've looked into reports of similar sightings in the area and found a few. Nothing recent and nothing quite as clear as what I saw, but enough to make me wonder. The Mogollon Rim area has a long history of strange encounters, going back to Native American legends. I'm not saying I believe in Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it, at least I didn't before that day. Now, I'm not so sure. I've been a practical man my whole life. I don't go in for ghost stories or conspiracy theories. I believe what I can see with my own eyes and touch with my own hands. And on April 22nd, 2014, I saw something that shouldn't exist, according to everything I know about the natural world. Sometimes I try to convince myself it wasn't real, that maybe Mark was right, and it was just a trick of light and shadow, my mind filling in details that weren't actually there. But then I remember the way it moved, the deliberate turn of its body toward me, the casual way it acknowledged my presence before simply walking away. No animal I know behaves like that. I don't have evidence. I didn't think to grab my phone for a picture. Honestly, in that moment, taking a photo was the furthest thing from my mind. All I have is what I saw and the absolute certainty that it was real. I still fish. I still go into the woods. But I'm more alert now, more aware of my surroundings. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the water and the wind picks up before a storm, I feel that same prickle on the back of my neck, that same certainty that something is watching me from the trees along the shore. Whatever it was I saw that day at Lake Full Hollow, it changed how I see the world. There are things out there we don't understand, things that have managed to stay hidden despite all our technology and development. And sometimes, if the conditions are just right and you're in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time, you might catch a glimpse of them. I did, and I'll never forget it. Story 14. I've been hesitant to share this for years. It's not something I talk about casually, and I've only told a few close friends who I trust won't think I'm completely losing my mind. But I need to get this out somewhere, even if it's just typing it into the void. I'm a healthcare worker, have been for almost 30 years now. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or monsters or any of that stuff. I deal with reality every day, sick patients, medical charts, hard facts. But what happened at our property outside Aberdeen, Washington, has shaken that foundation of reality for me. The most recent incidents happened back in 2007, but I need to start with what happened in '95, because that's when it all began. That first encounter has haunted me for years, and I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, trying to make sense of it. It was a warm summer evening, and I was outside with my sister, my daughter Rachel, my niece, and a friend. We were just chatting, enjoying the evening air. Our property backs up to dense woods, typical Pacific Northwest forest, tall trees, thick undergrowth. We were maybe 25 feet from my trailer when we heard something moving through the woods about 150 feet away. At first, I didn't think much of it. We get deer, sometimes elk, the occasional black bear. But this was different. Whatever was moving through there was big, and it wasn't being careful. We could hear branches snapping, undergrowth being crushed. The sound continued for almost 2 minutes, and we all just stood there listening, getting more and more uneasy. My sister had this big flashlight with her, one of those powerful ones that can light up a football field. She pointed it toward the sound, and what I saw next is burned into my memory. 2 red eyes staring back at us from about 6 feet off the ground. Not reflective like when you shine a light at a raccoon or deer at night. These were glowing like embers. They didn't blink. Then it made a sound I can't even properly describe. It was like multiple animals fighting at once, growling, snarling, almost screaming, but all mixed together in this horrifying chorus. And it started charging toward us. I've never felt fear like that. Pure, primal terror. We all dropped everything and ran. Even though our trailer was just 25 feet away, we ran in the opposite direction, about 50 yards, before we even thought to look back. By then, whatever it was had disappeared. For years I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, with some weird eye condition. Maybe it was multiple animals. Maybe the darkness and fear made us perceive things wrong. But deep down, I knew we'd seen something that didn't fit into any category I understood. Fast forward to August 2007. 12 years had passed, and while I never forgot that night, I'd convinced myself it was just one of those weird, unexplainable things that happen once in a lifetime. I was alone in my trailer, watching TV. It was around 9 in the evening, still light enough outside to see clearly. I had this feeling. You know that sensation when someone's watching you. The hairs on your neck stand up and you just know. I looked up at my north-facing window, and there it was. A face was staring at me from about 50 feet away, standing in front of my white shed. I'm not talking about a person. This thing had a distinctive cone-shaped head, like its skull came to a slight point at the top. It had dark brown to black hair, covering most of its face, but almost no hair around its nose and cheeks. The skin was a grayish-brown color. Its eyes weren't red this time. They were dark, deep-set, intense. I froze. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. I blinked, looked away for just a moment, and when I looked back, it was gone. Just vanished. Based on where it was standing relative to my shed, which is about 8 feet tall, this thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, probably closer to 7.5. After that night, things started escalating. Our indoor cat began acting strange. She'd never been much of an outdoor cat before, but suddenly she was desperate to get outside. And she'd always run along the exact same path into the forest. The weirdest part? She'd disappear for exactly 2 hours, almost to the minute, then come back. About a week after I saw the face, around 10 at night, the cat was trying to come back inside when we heard it. The same terrible sounds from 12 years earlier. That mix of growling, snarling, and unnatural noises that didn't sound like any single animal. It was coming from near our woodpile, about 40 feet from the house. The sounds lasted for maybe 30 to 45 seconds, and they seemed to be coming from something tall, not ground level. My daughter Rachel was with me, and the color drained from her face. She'd been there 12 years earlier too. "Mom," she whispered, "that's the same sound." I couldn't even respond. We just stood there, frozen, until the sound stopped. The cat bolted inside and hid under the bed for 3 days straight. 2 weeks after that, I was sitting by our campfire around 1 in the morning. My son Brian had gone to bed, and I was just enjoying the quiet, the stars. Then I heard it again, those animal sounds, this time about 40 yards away, deeper in the woods. I didn't wait around. I dumped water on the fire and got inside as fast as I could. Around the same time, Rachel had her own encounter. She'd been at a neighbor's house and was walking home around 2:30 in the morning. Our neighbors aren't far, maybe a quarter mile down the road. She was about halfway home when she heard something above her. A branch about 20 feet up suddenly shook violently. Not like when wind moves through trees. This was deliberate, like something was grabbing and shaking it. She looked up but couldn't see anything in the darkness. Whatever could reach that high had to be tall, much taller than a person. She ran home and burst through the door, out of breath and terrified. I'd never seen her so scared, and Rachel isn't someone who frightens easily. The final incident happened in early October. I was in the living room reading a book when the entire trailer suddenly shifted. The corner closest to the woods was being physically shaken, rocked back and forth. It wasn't subtle. Pictures fell off the walls, dishes rattled in the cabinets. It lasted maybe 15 seconds, then stopped. I called Brian in and asked him to try to shake the trailer. My son is 6 feet tall and works construction. He's strong. He grabbed the corner post and pushed with all his might, and I could barely feel any movement at all. Whatever had shaken our home that night had strength far beyond what any human could manage. After that, the incident stopped. No more sightings, no more sounds, no more shaking. Even the cat went back to normal, content to stay indoors. But the damage was done. I couldn't sleep properly for months. I'd lie awake, listening for sounds outside, watching the windows. Every crack of a branch in the forest set my heart racing. My kids and I have talked about it many times over the years. We've gone over every possible explanation. Bear? No bear stands 7 feet tall on 2 legs for that long, or has a cone-shaped head, or makes those kinds of sounds. Person in a costume? Why would someone do that repeatedly over 12 years? And how could they disappear so quickly, or shake a massive trailer? Some unknown animal? Maybe. But what kind of animal has those features, that behavior? I've lived in Washington my whole life. I know the wildlife here. This wasn't anything I recognized from nature documentaries or wildlife guides. It's been over 15 years since the last incident, but I still think about it all the time. When I'm out in my yard, I still find myself scanning the tree line. I still listen for unusual sounds in the forest. I still feel uneasy when I'm alone at night. I don't know what visited our property all those years ago. I don't know why it seemed focused on us, or why it eventually left. All I know is what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. And no matter how many years pass, I still can't explain it. Sometimes I drive by our old property. We moved in 2009, and I wonder if the new owners have experienced anything similar. I've never had the courage to stop and ask. Part of me doesn't want to know the answer. TQT, Story 15. I've been debating whether to share this for years. Even typing this now, my palms are sweating and I'm fighting the urge to just delete everything and try to forget it ever happened. But I can't forget. September 1997 changed how I see the woods forever. I've been hunting since I was 13. My dad taught me everything: tracking, reading sign, respecting the wilderness. By September 1997, I'd been hunting for over 20 years. I knew Alberta's backcountry like the back of my hand. At least I thought I did. Me, Jake, and Tim had been planning our annual elk hunt for months. We settled on a remote area along the Little Smoky River near Valley View. None of us had hunted there before, but Tim's cousin mentioned seeing massive herds moving through that drainage the previous season. The plan was simple: 5 days in the backcountry, hopefully bagging an elk or two and enjoying some time away from civilization. We drove in on a Tuesday morning, the truck loaded with our gear. The logging road got rougher the further we went, until we finally had to park and hike the last 3 kilometers to where we wanted to set up our base camp. The weather was perfect. Cool mornings, mild afternoons, typical September in Alberta. That first evening, we scouted the immediate area around camp and found a sandbar covered in fresh elk tracks. I mean fresh. They couldn't have been more than a few hours old. Jake was practically giddy. We marked the location on our maps and headed back to camp, planning to split up at first light to cover more ground. I still remember how normal everything felt that night. We cooked steaks over the fire, had a couple beers, and turned in early. The forest sounds were exactly what you'd expect. The occasional owl, wind in the pines, the river gurgling nearby. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing to suggest what was coming. The next morning, we ate quickly and divided up the territory. Jake would follow the river southeast, Tim would cross and check the eastern slopes, and I'd take the northwestern game trail that seemed to follow the herd's movement pattern. We agreed to meet back at camp by 4 p.m., no exceptions. I headed out around 7 in the morning with my 30-06, some jerky, water, and basic survival gear. The forest was thick but navigable, mostly pine with some aspen groves. The game trail was well worn and easy to follow, winding through the trees roughly parallel to the river, though I couldn't see the water anymore. The first hour was uneventful. I spotted some grouse, saw plenty of deer sign, but nothing indicating elk had passed through recently. About 2 kilometers from camp, the trail dipped into a small ravine before climbing up a gentle slope. I remember checking my watch. It was just after 8:30 when the smell hit me. And when I say hit me, I mean it was like walking face first into a wall. It was the most repulsive stench I've ever encountered, like rotting fish mixed with human shit, but with this sickly sweet undertone that made my stomach heave. My first thought was that I'd stumbled upon a carcass, but this was different, more intense, more, I don't know, pervasive somehow. That's when the feeling started. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I had this overwhelming sensation of being watched, not just from one direction, but from everywhere around me. The forest had gone completely silent, no birds, no squirrels, nothing, just absolute stillness except for the pounding of my heart. I froze. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but 20 years of hunting experience told me that running was the worst thing I could do. So I stood there, rifle ready, but not raised, trying to control my breathing and scan the surroundings without making sudden movements. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours, but was probably closer to 10 minutes. The entire time, that feeling of being watched intensified. The stench seemed to be getting stronger too, which made no sense unless whatever was causing it was getting closer. Finally, and I still kick myself for this, I shifted my weight slightly, just to ease the cramping in my right leg. My boot moved maybe an inch on the forest floor. What happened next still gives me nightmares. The forest erupted with movement, not from one direction, but from at least 3 different spots around me. I heard branches snapping, undergrowth being crushed, and I don't even know how to describe them, these sounds. Not quite grunts, not quite growls, but something in between. I caught glimpses of movement through the trees, large shapes moving with frightening speed, far faster than a bear or moose could move through thick brush. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The shapes seemed too tall, too fluid in their movement. But in the moment, all I registered was threat. I ran. 20 years of hunting experience went right out the window, and I ran like I've never run before. I abandoned every bit of training about what to do in wildlife encounters. Something primal took over, something that recognized I was in the presence of a predator far more dangerous than anything I'd ever encountered. The whole time I was running, I could hear movement paralleling me through the forest on both sides. Whatever they were keeping pace with me easily, crashing through undergrowth that should have slowed anything down. I don't remember most of that run back to camp. My lungs were burning, my legs were on fire, and I was soaked with sweat despite the cool morning. I just remember bursting into our campsite, falling to my knees and trying to catch my breath. Jake and Tim weren't back yet. I sat there alone, rifle clutched in my hands, staring at the tree line I'd just emerged from. The sounds of pursuit had stopped as soon as I reached the clearing, but that feeling of being watched remained. When Jake returned about an hour later, he found me sitting in the exact same spot, still watching the trees. He thought I was joking at first when I tried to explain what happened. Tim got back around noon, and both of them tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, maybe I spooked a moose, maybe the smell was just a dead animal and my mind played tricks on me. I almost let them convince me. Almost. We spent the afternoon in camp. Neither Jake nor Tim wanted to leave after seeing how shaken I was. though I could tell they thought I was overreacting. We decided to stay one more night, then head out in the morning if nothing else happened. As the day wore on, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Broken branches high up in trees surrounding our camp, places where the underbrush seemed unnaturally trampled. And occasionally, that same putrid smell would waft through our campsite, just for a moment, then disappear. Around dusk, we heard the first wood knocks. 3 distinct sounds, like someone hitting a baseball bat against a tree. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. 20 minutes later, from a different direction, knock, knock, knock. Woodpeckers, Tim suggested, not very convincingly. At dusk, Jake countered. And that loud? The knocking continued intermittently until dark. We built the fire up higher than necessary and stayed close to it. None of us mentioned leaving early anymore. We all sensed something wasn't right, though Jake and Tim still seemed skeptical about what I'd experienced that morning. We turned in around 11 p.m., each of us in our own tent. I don't think any of us slept much at first. I lay there listening to every sound, my rifle by my side. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off around 1 in the morning. The sound that woke us is something I'll never forget as long as I live. It started as a low yowl, almost like a big cat, but wrong somehow. It built steadily into this prolonged wailing howl that echoed through the valley. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a cougar. It wasn't anything I've ever heard in 20 years of hunting in North America. The closest comparison I can make, and this doesn't do it justice, is if you combined a woman screaming with the roar of a grizzly. But even that doesn't capture how unnatural it sounded. The entire forest went silent in response. Even the insects stopped chirping. Then it was answered. From the opposite ridge, at least a kilometer away, came an identical call. Then another, from yet another direction. They called back and forth 3 times before falling silent. We were out of there at first light. Nobody argued. Nobody suggested staying. We packed up in record time and hiked back to the truck without speaking much. Those wood knocks I'd dismissed earlier took on a whole new significance after what we heard in the night. That was 25 years ago. I've never been back to that part of the Little Smoky River, and I never will. Jake and Tim feel the same way. We still hunt together every year, but we never talk about what happened in 1997. I don't know what was in those woods. I don't claim to. All I know is that in over 40 years of hunting now, I've encountered bears, wolves, cougars, moose, and just about every other large mammal in North America. What stalked me that day wasn't any of those. Sometimes when I'm in the woods, even in completely different areas, I'll catch a faint whiff of that same smell, and my body reacts before my mind can process it, heart racing, palms sweating, that primal urge to flee kicking in. In those moments, I know they're out there, watching, waiting, and I know how lucky I was to walk out of those woods alive. Story 16. I've never told this story outside my immediate family. Maybe it's time I did. I'm 58 now, and the memory still gives me chills like it happened yesterday, not 47 years ago. My sister Mary passed away in 2014, so I'm the only one left who saw it. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I need to put this somewhere. It was February 3rd, 1977. I remember because it was 3 days before my 19th birthday. Mary was 21. We both worked at the paper mill in Hannibal, Ohio, right on the Ohio River. Mary was a secretary in the front office, and I worked in quality control. Our shift started at 6 in the morning, which meant leaving our parents' farmhouse by 5 to make it on time. That morning was bitter cold. The weatherman had predicted snow, and there was already a light dusting on the ground from the night before. Our breath came out in thick clouds as we hurried to my Chevy Nova. I remember scraping frost off the windshield with my gloved hands because the scraper had broken the week before. "Hurry up, Sarah," Mary said, hugging herself in her thick coat. "I'm freezing my ass off out here." I got the car started and cranked the heat, though we both knew it would take 10 minutes before it did anything. The seats were like ice. I was wearing thermal underwear beneath my jeans and still shivering. Our house was about 8 miles from the mill, most of it along Winesap Road, a twisty country road that followed Sunfish Creek for several miles. There were no streetlights, just the occasional mailbox reflector or driveway marker. The headlights barely cut through the darkness. Mary was half asleep beside me, her head resting against the passenger window. I had the radio on low, some AM station playing Fleetwood Mac. I remember that because later I couldn't listen to Go Your Own Way for years without feeling sick to my stomach. We were about 5 miles from home, in one of the most isolated stretches of Winesap. The creek ran alongside the road on the left, down a small embankment. There were thick woods beyond the creek and farmland on the right side of the road. No houses for at least a mile in either direction. I was driving carefully, maybe 30 miles per hour, because of the patchy ice. The headlights swept across the road ahead, catching the occasional reflection of animal eyes in the brush. Nothing unusual for country roads. Then I saw something in the creek bed. At first, I thought it was a pile of something, maybe garbage someone had dumped, or a deer that had been hit and dragged itself to the water. But something about it made me slow down. "What the hell is that?" I said, more to myself than to Mary. Mary straightened up, suddenly alert. "Where?" "There," I pointed toward the creek, "in the water." I'd slowed to maybe 15 miles per hour, peering through the darkness. The headlights caught whatever it was, illuminating what looked like dirty white fur or hair. A lot of it. "Is it a dog?" Mary asked, leaning forward to see better. Before I could answer, the thing moved. Not like an animal shifting position, but deliberately. It rose up from the creek bed, up and up and up. "Oh my God," Mary whispered. The thing stood on 2 legs. 2 legs. I want to be absolutely clear about that. It wasn't a bear rearing up. It wasn't a deer standing oddly. It was bipedal like a person, but massive. And then it charged the car. I'll never forget the way it moved. Not lumbering like a bear or bounding like a deer. It ran like a person, but faster than any human I've ever seen. Its arms, and they were arms, not front legs, swung at its sides. I hit the gas, but the Nova's wheels spun on a patch of ice before catching. In those few seconds, the thing reached the road and was running alongside us, maybe 15 or 20 feet away. "Sarah!" Mary screamed, pressing herself against the passenger door. "Go! Go!" I was already flooring it, the engine roaring as we fishtailed slightly before gaining traction. But the thing kept pace with us. For several seconds, probably no more than 5 or 6, but it felt like an eternity. It ran alongside the car as we accelerated to 40, then 50 miles per hour. The entire time, I could see it clearly in the headlights and the glow from the dashboard. It was covered in long, matted hair that might have been white originally, but was stained with dirt or mud. Its body was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. I couldn't see its face clearly. That's the one mercy in all this. The hair hung down over most of its features, and it never turned its head fully toward us. But I remember the impression of deep-set eyes reflecting the headlights, like an animal's eyeshine, but somehow worse. As we hit 60 miles per hour, it finally fell behind. I watched in the rearview mirror as it stopped in the middle of the road, standing there watching us drive away. Then the darkness swallowed it. Mary was sobbing beside me, her hands pressed over her mouth. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I didn't slow down until we reached the outskirts of Hannibal, where there were streetlights and early morning workers heading to the mill. I pulled into the paper mill parking lot 20 minutes early. We sat there, the engine running, neither of us making a move to get out. "What was that?" Mary finally whispered. "I don't know," I said. My voice sounded strange, detached. "A bear, maybe?" But we both knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't run on 2 legs for hundreds of yards at highway speeds. It was looking at us, Sarah. It was looking right at us. I still get goosebumps remembering her words. We went into work that day because we didn't know what else to do. I remember the surreal feeling of sitting at my desk, checking paper samples, like everything was normal, like we hadn't just seen something impossible. At lunch, Mary found me in the cafeteria. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "We need to tell someone," she said. "Who?" I asked. "The police. What would we say?" She didn't have an answer. That evening, when our shift ended, we asked our friend Jake to follow us home in his truck. We told him we'd had car trouble that morning. We didn't tell him the real reason, that I was terrified of breaking down on Winesap Road after dark. For the next 3 months, we carpooled with other mill workers. We made up excuses, saving gas money, car problems, whatever people would believe. We never drove that stretch of road alone, and never, ever before dawn or after dusk. Eventually, I got brave enough to tell my boyfriend Tom what we'd seen. He laughed, said we probably saw a horse that had gotten loose, or maybe a big dog. When I insisted it was walking on 2 legs, he suggested we'd been half asleep and imagined it. Mary told her friend Diane, who worked at the local library. Diane didn't laugh, at least. She came back a few days later with a book about Bigfoot sightings, said there had been reports in southeastern Ohio before. Mary and I looked through it, but none of the descriptions matched what we'd seen. The creatures in the book were described as dark brown or black, not white, and they were said to avoid humans, not chase cars. About a week after it happened, I drove back to that spot on Winesap Road, in daylight, with Tom. I wanted to see if there were footprints or other evidence. There was nothing. The creek bed was a mess of mud, animal tracks and debris. If there had been unusual footprints, they were long gone. "See," Tom said, "probably just a deer. Your mind played tricks on you in the dark." I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd seen. Over the years, Mary and I spoke about it less and less. Not because the memory faded, it never did, but because we got tired of the disbelief, the jokes, the way people looked at us like we were crazy or attention-seeking. In 1986, there was a series of Bigfoot sightings reported near Marietta, about 40 miles from Monroe County. The newspaper descriptions sounded similar to what we'd seen, except for the color. I clipped the articles. Mary called me when she saw them too. "Do you think?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe." But we didn't come forward. What was the point? No one had believed us when it happened. Why would they believe us 9 years later? Mary moved to Cincinnati in 1991, got married, had kids. I stayed in Monroe County, eventually taking over our parents' farm after they passed. Tom and I split up, not because of the incident, but it didn't help that he thought I was either lying or crazy about something so fundamental to my experience. In 2012, Mary was diagnosed with breast cancer. During one of my visits to her in the hospital, she brought it up again. "Sarah," she said, her voice weak from the chemo, "do you still remember that thing we saw?" "Of course I do," I said. "Every detail." "I've been thinking about it a lot lately," she said, "wondering what it was, if anyone else ever saw it." "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never heard of another sighting like ours around here." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not afraid anymore," she finally said. "Of being laughed at, I mean. I know what I saw." Mary died 2 years later. At her funeral, I thought about telling her husband and children about what we'd seen that morning, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Some experiences are too strange, too personal to share, even with family. But lately, I've been thinking about it more. I'm getting older. When I'm gone, the memory goes with me. So I'm writing it down now, putting it out there. I don't know what we saw on Winesap Road in February of 1977. I don't have a name for it. Wasn't a bear, wasn't a horse, wasn't a human in a costume. Nothing human moves that fast or stands that tall. All I know is that it was real. It chased our car. and for a few terrifying seconds it looked right at us through the window with an intelligence that still haunts my dreams. Sometimes when I drive that stretch of road, always in daylight now, I find myself scanning the creek bed, half expecting to see a shape rising up from the water. I never have, but I still avoid Winesap Road before dawn or after dusk. Some lessons you only need to learn once.